Chapter 200. Wei Jiuduan was very satisfied with Chu Xiu's submission. He had been in charge of Guanxi for so many years, and his requirement for his subordinates was very simple. There was only one word: obedience. Regardless of whether you were dissatisfied or cursed in your heart, as long as you were obedient, Wei Jiuduan would be satisfied. When he walked out of the study, Yang Ling was still waiting outside. Chu Xiu snorted coldly at Yang Ling, turned around and left. From Wei Jiuduan's point of view, Chu Xiu's attitude was considered normal. However, he did not notice the strange look in Chu Xiu and Yang Ling's eyes. Wei Jiuduan patted Yang Ling's shoulder and said, "Yang Ling, don't say that I didn't promote you this time. In order for you to be the patrol inspector, I forcefully suppressed the credit that Chu Xiu deserved." Yang Ling had a smile at the corner of his mouth. He cupped his hands respectfully at Wei Jiuduan and said, "Thank you, foster father. Rest assured, foster father, I will definitely go through fire and water for foster father in the future. I will be loyal and filial." Wei Jiuduan smiled with satisfaction and led Yang Ling out of the door. In the secret chamber, after Wei Jiuduan left with his people, he instructed the Ghost Hand King, Du Guangzhong, and the others that he was going to go into seclusion. Chu Xiu did not know what the token fragment from the Ghost King's sect was used for. This thing was very likely to be related to the Kunlun devil cult in the past. Therefore, Chu Xiu could not take it out for others to see. As for those two cultivation methods, they were a pleasant surprise for Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu was very familiar with these two cultivation methods. They were written on the skin of an unknown beast, and the text was blood-red and twisted. These were the two cultivation methods from the heaven and earth intersecting yin-yang sorrowful poem. The two techniques that Chu Xiu obtained from the Ghost King's sect were the Great Acupoint Shifting Technique of Heaven and Earth, and the Great Chaos of Heaven and Earth. In the original plot, Chu Xiu had heard of the Heaven and Earth Shifting Great Acupoint Shifting Technique, but he had never heard of the name of the Heaven and Earth Chaos Great Origin Technique. The Great Acupoint Shifting Art of Shifting Heaven and Earth had the lowest evaluation in the Great Sorrowful Poem of Heaven and Earth intersecting Yin and Yang. It was only at the fifth revolution, and its function was not to attack, but to support. The meridians and acupoints in the human body all had fixed positions, unless you were born different from ordinary people. For example, your heart was on the right side, or your meridians were in a unique position. However, such cases were still rare. Therefore, most of the martial arts in the Jianghu had a fixed location for the meridians and acupoints that one would pass through when practicing. There were also some offensive martial arts, such as some sinister and ruthless sword techniques or finger techniques, which attacked the vital points of the human body. As the name suggested, the Great Acupoint Shifting Technique allowed one to shift their meridians and acupoints. When facing an enemy, even if the acupoints were shifted by an inch, it would be able to avoid injuring their vitals and save their lives. Moreover, this martial art also had some effects when practicing. For example, when using this martial art to shift the meridians and acupoints while circulating qi, it could also make the circulation of qi smoother and faster. In short, this martial art was somewhat ordinary and had no direct effects. It was mainly used as a support. Its evaluation of the fifth revolution was mostly because it was one of the great sorrowful poems of heaven and earth crossing yin and yang. Otherwise, based on the world of martial arts habit of grading martial arts, this sort of support-type martial arts would not have a high grade. Only qi skills that could increase one's realm or martial arts skills that were incredibly powerful would be seen as orthodox and be given a very high grade. At this time, Chu Xiu picked up the other Great Chaos of Heaven and Earth Chaos Great Origin Technique and carefully read it. This martial art did not appear in the original plot. It was possible that it was obtained by the righteous sects and destroyed, or even secretly practiced. After reading it, Chu Xiu's eyes suddenly lit up. The Great Chaos of Heaven and Earth Chaos Great Origin Technique turned out to be an internal strength, and it was a powerful internal strength that did not look like a demonic martial art. At the beginning of the world, primordial qi had not yet been divided, and the clear, turbid, and chaos were one. This was the origin of the great chaos of heaven and earth chaos great origin technique. In the body, the scene of the beginning of the world was simulated, so that the clear, turbid, and chaos were integrated into one. When attacking, the power of the primordial burst out without the slightest attribute, but because the power of the primordial was the power of the beginning of the world, it could resist any internal strength gang qi, and it could also integrate any internal strength gang qi. In the past, the internal strength that Chu Xiu mainly cultivated was the Xiantian skill. Although his foundation was very stable, he did not have many special abilities other than that. But now the great chaos of heaven and earth chaos great origin technique could make Chu Xiu's own cultivation accumulation to a higher level, and the explosive power when fighting was even more amazing. Moreover, because it could integrate any internal strength gang qi, Chu Xiu did not have to worry about the power in his body conflicting. From Chu Xiu's perspective, the great chaos of heaven and earth chaos great origin technique had at least 6 revolutions, and it was even possible for it to be 7 revolutions. The most important thing was that Chu Xiu had already collected 4 of the great sorrow of heaven and earth chaos great origin technique. Was there any hope for him to collect the remaining 3? And according to Chu Xiu, of the remaining 3, 2 of them were very powerful, one was 7 revolutions, and the other was 8 revolutions. And if he really collected the great sorrow of heaven and earth chaos great sorrow of heaven and earth chaos great origin technique, and the 7 martial arts into one, he did not know if it would really have the power to shock the world and make ghosts and gods weep. Of course, these were only temporary thoughts of Chu Xiu. After getting the martial arts, he used this opportunity to start practicing in seclusion, and he left the outside matters to the Ghost Hand King and Du Guangzhong to handle. In fact, there was no big problem in the Jianghu prefecture at the moment. The people of the Ghost King's sect had been cleaned up, and the order in the Jianghu prefecture was also recovering. There were more merchants coming and going, and it was only a matter of time before the city returned to its peak. Similarly, with Wei Hanzhan dead, no one came to cause trouble for Chu Xiu. Previously, Du Guangzhong said that Wei Hanzhan was the illegitimate son of the Nine Plains Wei clan, but with Wei Hanshan's death, the Nine Plains Wei clan did not show up, perhaps because they had no reason to and no opportunity to do so. After all, the people from the main hall had investigated the matter of the Ghost King's sect. Wei Hanshan died in the hands of the Ghost King's sect, and there was no flaw in the story. It had nothing to do with Chu Xiu. They didn't even have a reason to blame Chu Xiu for being late. With Yang Ling testifying on the side, it was the people of Sword King City who were anxious and acted without waiting for Chu Xiu. Who could be blamed for courting death? Moreover, there was no news from Sword King City even after such a long time had passed. It was likely that Sword King City had pinched their noses and accepted the matter. Although Wei Hanzhan died in the Guangzhong torture room, he was killed by the Ghost King sect. No idiot from Sword King City would come to cause trouble for the Guangzhong torture room. Of course, Sword King City had suffered such a big loss this time. It was inevitable that they would hunt down the Ghost King sect in the underworld. Moreover, Chu Xiu speculated that Sword King City didn't know what the Ghost King sect had in their hands. Perhaps they knew what the Ghost King sect had, but they didn't think that the value of these things was worth it for them to fall out with the Guangzhong torture room. Therefore, even after such a long time, Sword King City hadn't come to negotiate with the Guangzhong torture room because of the Ghost King sect's corpses. According to Chu Xiu, it should be the former. The great compassion poem of heaven and earth intersecting yin and yang wasn't a low-grade cultivation method. Although it wasn't suitable for Sword King City's cultivators to practice, it could still be sealed. It was the same with the fragment of the token. The people from the Ghost King sect thought that it was as valuable as the great compassion poem of heaven and earth intersecting yin and yang. Since they were kept together, it was obviously not something simple. Although these things together weren't enough for the sect master of Sword King City to come and ask for them in person, at least the hall master of the Battle Sword Hall would be enough. However, Sword King City didn't respond at all. Therefore, Chu Xiu guessed that they didn't know the true value of this thing and underestimated it. That was why they decided to give it to the Guanzhong torture room. 2 months later, before Chu Xiu was ready to come out of seclusion, Du Guangzhong sent a message saying that Wei Jiuduan was looking for him. Chu Xiu frowned when he heard the news. What was Wei Jiuduan up to this time? Originally, Chu Xiu didn't plan to come out of seclusion so soon. Chu Xiu had already cultivated the great pressure point shifting technique of heaven and earth. During this time, Chu Xiu mainly cultivated the great chaos technique of heaven and earth. In fact, Chu Xiu wanted to use this opportunity to break through to the three-flower realm at one's prominence. After fighting with warriors at the three-flower realm at one's prominence several times, Chu Xiu had some understanding of his current realm. He could try to break through to the three-flower realm at one's prominence, but Wei Jiuduan had obviously disrupted his plans. Chu Xiu asked, "Did Wei Jiuduan say what it is?" Du Guangzhong shook his head and said, "He didn't say. However, judging from the attitude of the messenger, it shouldn't be anything bad. He also didn't ask you to go there right away." Chu Xiu nodded and made arrangements for the inspector's hall. He then went straight to the Guanxi branch. In a meeting room of the Guanxi branch, Wei Jiuduan smiled when he saw Chu Xiu coming. He said, "Chu Xiu, you got a great credit last time, but you didn't get the Shangzhou government. That was a bit unfair for you. This time, I've given you a good opportunity. It's up to you whether you can take it or not." Chu Xiu was puzzled and asked, "What is Master Wei referring to?" Wei Jiuduan kept him in suspense and said, "Anyway, it's a good thing. You'll know when you come with me to the main hall." With that, Wei Jiuduan took Chu Xiu with him and quickly arrived at the main hall of the punishment hall. Chu Xiu was a little confused. After arriving at the main hall, Chu Xiu found that it was a lot livelier than before. In the past, the main hall was the place that commanded the entire Guanzhong and gave orders. Although there were a lot of people here, it was not like today. The warriors of the punishment hall from Guangdong, Guanbei, and Guannan were all gathered here. Chu Xiu even saw some people from the punishment division. Seeing this, Chu Xiu couldn't help but mutter to himself, could something big have happened in the Guanzhong torture room? However, judging by Wei Jiuduan's expression, it couldn't be anything bad. Chapter 201. Outside the main hall, Chu Xiu watched the martial artists of the Guanzhong torture room come and go. He could not help but ask Wei Jiuduan, "Master Wei, did something big happen in the Guanzhong torture room?" Wei Jiuduan laughed, "It is big, but it is good news for you. It started a month ago. You should have heard of the God of Weapons Pavilion, right?" Chu Xiu nodded and said, "Of course I know of the Divine Weapon Pavilion, one of the 7 sections. In the Jianghu, the Divine Weapon Pavilion was one of the 7 sects and 8 schools. Its reputation could be said to be very big. As the name suggested, the God of Weapons Pavilion was a place where blacksmiths gathered. It was said that 70% of the blacksmiths in the world were in the God of Weapons Pavilion. It was also said that every generation of the God of Weapons Pavilion had to forge a God of Weapons. As the owner of the God of Weapons Pavilion, one had to have the ability to forge a God of Weapons. It had always been easy to obtain ordinary weapons in Jianghu, but it was hard to find precious weapons. Divine weapons were existences that could only be found by chance, not sought. As for the legendary peerless divine weapons, they were already legends. Naturally, their rarity could be imagined. However, in the God of Weapons Pavilion, God of Weapons could be asked for. As long as one's strength was worthy of a God of Weapons, the God of Weapons Pavilion would even personally forge a God of Weapons for you. In other places, people would choose the weapon, but in the God of Weapons Pavilion, it was the weapon that chose the person. If the weapon was not suitable for you, then no matter how much you paid, the God of Weapons Pavilion would not forge it for you. Wei Jiuduan continued, the Divine Weapon Pavilion's previous pavilion master, Refiner Grandmaster Moez, had already retired from the Jianghu more than 10 years ago, giving up his position as pavilion master. He lived in seclusion in the Mirror Lake Manor's Mo family to cultivate, no longer forging weapons for others. However, a month ago, the Hidden Sword Villa, one of the 5 major sword sects, took out an extremely precious material and asked Mo Yizi to forge a weapon. It was said that the finished product was of the level of a god of weapons. Moreover, the Hidden Sword Villa announced to the entire martial world that all of the younger generation of martial artists could come to the Mirror Lake Villa to learn from each other. When the time came, they would choose a young talent that could gain the approval of the weapon. Mo Yizi, who had not made a move for more than 10 years, was once again crafting a weapon. He even had the protection of the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor. This was a grand event for the younger generation of the Jianghu. Many large sects and martial artists from the wilderness would participate. Over the years, Guangzhong Torture Room has been lacking in outstanding disciples of the younger generation, so we've been absent from many events involving the younger generation of the Jianghu. But this time, Hall Master Guan has decided that he can't be absent anymore, so the young people from the 4 regions of Guangzhong and the arrest department have all arrived at the main hall, preparing to choose a representative from the Guangzhong Torture Room to participate in the God Weapon Conference this time. As for my Guangxi region, I didn't even inform anyone and directly chose you. Hearing Wei Jiuduan's words, Chu Xiu couldn't help sneering inwardly. Wei Jiuduan made it sound like he was doing him a huge favor, but in reality, in the entire Guangxi region, if he didn't choose him, who else would he choose? Other than him, the only one who could be considered younger in the Guangxi region was Yang Ling. However, Yang Ling was Jiuduan's adopted son, and Wei Jiuduan knew his strength very well. He could handle some chores, but if he were to really compete with the other younger generation of martial artists from the Guangzhong Torture Room, his strength was really not enough. Therefore, in the entire Guangxi region, Wei Jiuduan could only choose him. In the end, Wei Jiuduan was still doing him a favor. However, there was one thing that was very strange. Why would the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor host this God Weapon Conference and willingly give away the God Weapon? The Hidden Sword Mountain Manor was also one of the 5 major sword sects in the 5 swords dividing the world. Of course, their combat power was not as good as the Sword King City, but the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor had a special characteristic: they liked to collect the world's famous swords. There were 108 famous swords in the world, and the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor had 50 of them. With so many famous swords, there were precious weapons and even god weapons. The Hidden Sword Mountain Manor naturally couldn't use them all, so they collected them and maintained them day and night. In the eyes of others, it was not a waste for the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor to collect them, but to the people of the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor, this was their faith in the sword. This time, the materials were provided by the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor. If Mo Yizi forged the weapon, it was very likely that a god weapon would be forged. Could the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor be willing to give away the god weapon? With such doubts, Chu Xiu also asked Wei Jiuduan, "Is the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor really willing to take out the god weapon?" Wei Jiuduan smiled and said, "Of course not." However, since the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor invited Mo Yizi to forge the weapon, they have to abide by Mo Yizi's rules. As the previous pavilion master of the God Weapon Pavilion, Mo Yizi had always been particular about the person matching the weapon, not the weapon matching the person. If you cannot obtain the weapon's recognition, then you are not qualified to control the weapon. Therefore, even if the materials were provided by the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor, as long as the weapon was forged by Mo Yizi, then it must abide by Mo Yizi's rules. Moreover, this was the God Weapon Conference, not the Immortal Sword Conference. It was said that Mo Yizi would use a new method that he had researched for more than 10 years to forge the weapon. Whether the final weapon would be a saber or a sword, even Mo Yizi himself did not know. If it was a sword, then the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor would still fight for it. If it was any other weapon, then the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor would not even participate, and would only be the host. This time, it can be said to be a grand event for the younger generation of the pugilistic world. I believe that there will be many people participating. Even if the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor does not obtain anything in the end, the reputation will still belong to the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor. Chu Xiu slapped his head. He had forgotten about this point. As the host of such a grand event, the reputation that the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor could obtain was extremely huge. With a different status, the things that they saw would be different. Chu Xiu really did not think about this point just now. This kind of grand event that involved the entire pugilistic world, even if a normal person wanted to host it, they would have to see whether others would give them face or not. For example, if the Great Light Temple or the Subodhi Monastery wanted to host a Zen discussion conference, then all the big and small Buddhist sects would definitely come. Even other martial artists would come to watch. However, if it was just a small, unknown temple that held this kind of conference, it was estimated that only a few Tom, Dick, and Harry would come. Normally, with the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor's strength, they would not be able to host this kind of grand event that involved the entire pugilistic world. However, with the temptation of the God weapon, it was estimated that there would be many talents of the pugilistic world that would come. Wei Jiuduan said, later, fight hard for I. The Guanzhong torture room will only send one person. This opportunity has already been given to you by I. Whether or not you can grasp it, it will be up to you. As he said this, Wei Jiuduan brought Chu Xiu into the main hall. However, following behind Wei Jiuduan, Chu Xiu was frowning. He felt that things had somewhat exceeded his expectations. The God Weapon Conference this time involved the entire pugilistic world. It was impossible that the original plot did not exist, and it was even more impossible for Chu Xiu to forget. In the end, in reality, Chu Xiu rummaged through all the memories in his mind, but there was no record of this God Weapon Conference. What this meant was already self-evident. It meant that the plot had already changed because of Chu Xiu's butterfly effect. In fact, Chu Xiu had thought of this a long time ago. The only thing he didn't expect was for things to happen so quickly. Most importantly, Chu Xiu did not expect that he would actually affect the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor. Right now, Chu Xiu was only a young martial artist with some fame among the younger generation. His position was also only that of the Guanzhong Patrol. Most importantly, the Hidden Sword Mountain Manor was far away in eastern Qi. No matter how he thought about it, Chu Xiu could not understand what he had actually done to actually affect Eastern Qi and cause such a huge butterfly effect, even creating a God Weapon Conference. This was not a good thing for Chu Xiu, because his advantage of being familiar with the plot was gradually disappearing. Aside from the relics buried deep underground that would not change their location, anything that involved people here, even if it was just a sentence, could very likely change part of the plot. Thinking of this, Chu Xiu followed Wei Jiuduan to the Great Hall of the Guanzhong torture room. At this time, in the Great Hall, the other torturers had already arrived. Wei Jiuduan secretly transmitted a message to Chu Xiu, introducing them. The first on the left is the Guanzhong torturer, Million Swords Flow, Xiao Yi. Among the 4 places in Guanzhong, his territory is the largest, and his subordinates are also the strongest. It is said that this person used to be one of the 5 major sword sects, an abandoned disciple of the Forgotten Sword Hut. I do not know whether this is true or not, but his sword is very frightening. Chu Xiu looked over. This Xiao Yi was a middle-aged man in his 40s, and his appearance could be considered handsome. However, his current conduct was not like that of a torturer. Everyone else was sitting obediently in the disciplinary hall's headquarters. Only he was slumping lazily on a chair, looking like a sloppy child. The first on the right is the Guannan torturer, Shadowless Flying Dragon, Yin Batong. Remember well, this old fellow's conduct is the most treacherous. He is a fellow who can stab you with a knife and smile brilliantly at you at the same time. From Wei Jiuduan's tone, it seemed that he had some conflict with Yin Batong, and Yin Batong's appearance was indeed somewhat beyond Chu Xiu's imagination. The other's nickname was Shadowless Flying Dragon. From this nickname, one could tell that he was skilled in speed-type movement techniques. But in reality, he was a short and fat old man. He had a smiling expression, and did not have any of the imposing manner of a torturer. After the first two torturers finished their introductions, Chu Xiu looked towards the last torturer. He could not help but show a trace of surprise in his eyes. This was because the last torturer was actually a middle-aged man from the western regions with blonde hair and blue eyes. It must be known that in the current Jianghu, the people of the western regions were actually quite discriminated against. This was because the martial artists in the western regions were very weak, and there were many small nations and tribes. Only when the three nations were at war would these small nations in the western regions be a bit more stable. Otherwise, when the Central Plains were unified, these small nations in the western regions would definitely be pushed to the ground and rubbed against each other. Thus, in the Central Plains, the people of the western regions were generally reduced to second-class people. Some Central Plains sects would not even accept foreign races as disciples. But in the end, in Guangzhou, a foreign race person was sitting in the position of torturer. This was truly somewhat unbelievable. Chapter 202. Wei Jiuduan pointed at the torture officer and said, "This man is the Guanbei torture officer, Chu Simo. Among the disciplinary officials in Guangzhou right now, no one can compare to him in terms of loyalty to the Guangzhou Disciplinary Hall. Even I am the same." Chu Xiu secretly glanced at Wei Jiuduan. "Do you still have any loyalty to the Guangzhou torture room?" Wei Jiuduan didn't notice Chu Xiu's gaze. He said in a deep voice, "Chu Simo was originally a slave from the West. His original name was Ashina Simo, and he was sold to Guangzhou as a laborer. It was Chu Kuanga who saved him and taught him martial arts, so he changed his surname and joined the Guangzhou torture room." This foreigner knew more about loyalty than the people of the Central Plains. When Lord Chu Kuanga was around, he would go through fire and water to carry out Lord Chu Kuanga's orders, even if he had to die 10,000 times. Before official Chu passed away, he gave the position to Master Guan. He is also loyal to Master Guan, disregarding his own interests. Everything he does is for the Guangzhou torture room. Wei Jiuduan paused at this point. He knew what kind of person he was. Compared to Chu Simo, he, an old man of the Guangzhou torture room, had done something that harmed the interests of the Guangzhou torture room. However, Wei Jiuduan had no intention of changing. Even if you knew what you did was wrong, you still had to do it because it concerned interests. When Wei Jiuduan stepped into the meeting hall, Yin Badong suddenly laughed and said, "Wei Jiuduan, I thought you weren't coming. I heard you are too old to manage things. The Guanxi area is a mess because of you. Can the Guanxi still have anyone? Why don't you give us this opportunity as soon as possible?" Wei Jiuduan's face darkened. He snorted and said, "Yin Badong, no one will think you are mute if you don't speak. Do you really need me to tell you all the bullshit you've done in the Guannan region?" Yin Badong sneered, "Wei Jiuduan, all you can do now is talk. How long can you be the torture officer? When you step down from this position, unless you scram out of Guangzhou with your tail between your legs, you should call this official Darren when you see me." Wei Jiuduan's eyes turned red and he was about to explode. He was old and about to retire. This was Wei Jiuduan's Achilles heel. No one in Guanxi dared to touch it. In the end, he met his archenemy, Yin Badong, who did not hesitate to use this to mock Wei Jiuduan. Unfortunately, Wei Jiuduan could not say anything. Yin Badong was not young, but compared to Wei Jiuduan, he was still considered young. So even if Wei Jiuduan retired, Yin Badong could still stay in his position for more than 10 years. At that time, according to the rules of the Guangzhou torture hall, wouldn't he have to call him Lord? This was something Wei Jiuduan couldn't tolerate. Just as the two sides were at loggerheads, the East Yen inspector, Shao Yi, said lazily, "The total age of the two of you is almost longer than the entire Guangzhou torture room. Is there any meaning in fighting the moment you meet? Can you pay attention to your image? There are still many juniors watching over here. Upon hearing this, everyone in the meeting hall turned to look at Xiao Yi. This fellow had a lazy appearance and was about to collapse into his chair. Wasn't he the one with the least image here? But after Xiao Yi spoke, both Wei Jiuduan and Yin Batong snorted and stopped arguing. Xiao Yi was the strongest among the 4 disciplinary officers. He also had the most influence. Even though he was young, everyone present had to give him face. His words were really effective. However, after sitting down, Wei Jiuduan used his inner force to transmit his voice to Chu Xiu in a low voice. He said fiercely, "Remember, when the competition starts, if you meet any of Yin Batong's subordinates, give them a good beating. As long as you don't kill anyone, cripple them, I'll take care of them." While you are in seclusion, the Anzhou inspector, Kai Jingsheng's old injuries relapsed. Plus, he isn't young anymore, so he might step down from his position. As long as you cripple Yin Batong's subordinates this time and make him lose all his face, the 2 prefectures under Kai Jingsheng's command in the An province and the Hua province will be under your control. Chu Xiu looked at Wei Jiuduan in surprise. It seemed that Wei Jiuduan was really angered by Yin Batong. He actually dared to say such words in public. However, Chu Xiu was truly tempted by the offer of 2 prefectures. He said in a low voice, "But sir, Hall Master Guan will be here soon. It wouldn't be good to injure someone in front of Hall Master Guan, right?" Wei Jiuduan laughed coldly and said, "Swords have no eyes, fists and kicks have no heart. Isn't it normal for martial artists to get injured in a fight? Don't worry, Master Guan won't care about this. He only cares about the result. As long as you perform well enough and have the strength to fight for the Guanzhong torture room's reputation, it will be fine." Hearing Wei Jiuduan say this, Chu Xiu was relieved. Actually, it was more difficult to cripple someone than to kill them. This was because one had to control their strength. If the conditions allowed it, Chu Xiu still preferred to kill people. At this moment, Yin Batong was also talking to a gloomy-looking youth. When he saw Chu Xiu looking at him, he couldn't help but smile coldly at Chu Xiu. After a quarter of an hour, Guan Siyu led his men into the hall. Behind him was his wife, the extremely charming woman, Mei Qinglian. Seeing that Mei Qinglian had also appeared, the 4 disciplinary officers frowned slightly. This was the Guanzhong torture room's meeting. Although Mei Qinglian was Guan Siyu's wife, she was just a wife. She didn't have any position in the Guanzhong torture room. Yet, she had appeared here, which was clearly inappropriate. However, even if it was inappropriate, it was not a taboo matter, so none of the 4 present said anything. Apart from Guan Siyu and Mei Qinglian, there were 3 other people who walked in. One of them was Guan Siyu's disciple, Yuqi. The other was a middle-aged martial artist at the Unity of Heaven and Man realm. He was dressed in black and had a cold expression. There was a knife scar between his eyebrows, and he gave off an unapproachable feeling. The young man beside him was the same. His aura was very similar to his. Wei Jiuduan whispered, "This person is the 3rd head of the punishment division, Bloody Ghost Butcher, Si Ming. He's a little like you. He also came from an assassin's organization. However, it wasn't the Blue Dragon Society but a small assassin's organization. In order to leave that assassin's organization, Si Ming secretly used all sorts of methods to slaughter everyone in that small assassin's organization. Only then did he completely leave the organization." When Chu Xiu heard this, he couldn't help but look at Si Ming. This person was much more ruthless than him. He had left the Blue Dragon Society just to make things difficult for Heavenly Sin Division leader. He had also indirectly helped Heavenly Sin Division leader return to the Blue Dragon Society headquarters. However, this person had killed everyone and was considered to have completely separated himself from the assassin organization. Wei Jiuduan whispered, "Remember, the punishment division is different from the rest of us in the Guanzhong torture room. None of them are easy to mess with. For example, this Si Ming might be the only one in the entire Guanzhong torture room who only knows how to kill and not solve cases. Chu Xiu rubbed his nose. He really wanted to say that he was the same. Aside from martial arts, there were many other things to learn in the pugilistic world. Putting aside the Guanzhong torture room's methods of judging traces, there were also alchemy, blacksmithing, and arrays. With Chu Xiu's current status, it was very easy for him to learn these things, especially the Guanzhong torture room's methods of solving cases. Du Guangzhong and the others all came from the Guanzhong torture room. If he wanted to learn, would Du Guangzhong and the others dare not teach him? It was just that Chu Xiu was too lazy to learn, or rather, he would rather spend his time on cultivation. Most of the time, Chu Xiu's way of handling things was actually very simple. As long as he could solve it by killing, then he would kill. Although solving it with violence was the least technical, it was also the most effective. In the end, in the pugilistic world, one still had to rely on one's own strength to speak. For example, Nie Donglu from the morgue. Chu Xiu had to admit that the other party had his ways and was shrewd enough. At such a young age, he was already famous in the pugilistic world. Nie Dongliu's 6th place on the Longhu leaderboard was obtained by his own scheming. But for someone like him, 6th place on the Longhu leaderboard was already the pinnacle. Above it, which of the top 5 wasn't an amazing person? Without sufficient strength, one couldn't reach this position. At that moment, when Guan Siyu saw that everyone had arrived, he coughed. In an instant, the slightly noisy meeting hall quietened down. Looking at everyone, Guan Siyu said in a deep voice, "You should know about the God Weapon Conference that Hidden Sword Villa took the lead in organizing this time. In the past few decades, regardless of whether it was the older generation or the younger generation, the Guanzhong torture room was all absent. It's not that the Guanzhong torture room didn't want to go, but at that time, the Guanzhong torture room really didn't have the time or the people to go." Everyone present nodded. They had also come from that era, so they naturally knew about the plight of the Guanzhong torture room in the past. At that time, Chu Kuanga had just died, and the Guanzhong torture room was unstable. Guan Siyu had just taken charge of the torture chamber, and there were many people who were not convinced. It could be said that there were internal and external troubles. Until now, the Guanzhong torture room had established internal order, and the external parties had also reached an agreement with the 3 countries. Only then was it considered to have completely stabilized. Guan Siyu continued to say, "Now that the Guanzhong torture room has stabilized, the Guanzhong torture room has to fight for some reputation. This time, the God Weapon Conference will be led by the Hidden Sword Villa, one of the 5 major sword sections. I reckon that it will attract many young talents in the pugilistic world, as well as some young experts from the wilderness. The Guanzhong torture room is also planning to send someone over this time. It doesn't matter if he can get the God weapon or not. What's important is to show the power of the Guanzhong torture room and let the other forces in the pugilistic world see that the Guanzhong torture room still has a successor." Chapter 203. Among the young talents in the pugilistic world, most of them came from large sects or aristocratic families. To a warrior, it was very important to build a foundation at a young age. Hence, the disciples of these large sects could easily stand out and win at the starting line. In terms of strength, the Guanzhong torture room did not lose to the large sects or aristocratic families. However, in terms of nurturing their young disciples, they could not compare. The reason was simple. The system was different. As long as the large sects and aristocratic families discovered the talent of their disciples, they would immediately send an expert to take them in as a disciple and teach them carefully. Basically, they would not let them do any chores to prevent it from affecting their cultivation progress. However, the Guanzhong torture room was different. Everything depended on ability and effort. No matter how talented you were, you had to slowly endure in the underworld. Although this was fair, it also made it so that there were very few people in the younger generation of the Guanzhong torture room could stand out. For example, Guan Xiyu's personal disciple, Yuqi, was raised by him since he was young. However, he did not receive any special treatment. He still had to carry out various missions to accumulate experience. This time, the Guanzhong torture room had been quiet for too long. They were prepared to make a name for themselves in the pugilistic world. Hence, they had gathered everyone and selected one person to show their might at the God Weapon Conference. They did not seek to win first place, but they wanted to let outsiders see the strength of the next generation of the Guanzhong torture room. Guan Xiyu looked at the 4 torture officers present and said, "The 4 of you have chosen 4 youths. Si Ming has also recommended one person on behalf of the Criminal Investigation Department. There is also my disciple, Yuqi. These 6 people should be the 6 most outstanding people in the younger generation of the Guanzhong torture room. Let's draw lots and compete. 3 out of 6 will advance. The last 3 will draw lots to decide the first place. The rules are very simple." As she spoke, someone took out a box for drawing lots and handed it to Chu Xiu and the others to draw lots one by one. Guan Xiyu glanced at the results of the drawing. The first round was Yuqi against the young martial artist from the Criminal Investigation Department, Zhong Ping. The meeting hall was not a place to fight. Hence, everyone moved the place to the training field behind the torture chamber. Zhong Ping was worthy of being Si Ming's disciple. He had a cold expression on his face and held a strange weapon in his hand. It looked like a saber and a sword at the same time. The body of the saber was straight like a long sword, and it was sharp on both sides. Only the tip of the saber had a slight curve. Yuqi smiled at Zhong Ping and said, "Brother Zhong, this is the first time we've fought in such a long time. I've always wanted to experience Brother Zhong's martial arts." Zhong Ping shook his head coldly and said, "My martial arts are killing techniques. If you want to experience it, then let's fight to the death." Yuqi's smile froze. He could be considered a smooth and slick person, but how could he respond to Zhong Ping's words? Right at this moment, Si Ming suddenly said to Guan Xiyu, "Hall Master, let Zhong Ping admit defeat in this round. I taught him killing techniques. Once he makes a move, it has to see blood and determine life and death. It's not suitable for sparring. Moreover, even if it's during the God Weapon Convention, if Zhong Ping can't control himself, it's easy for him to cause trouble." Guan Xiyu waved her hand and said, "Martial arts are meant to kill. Can martial arts that don't kill be called martial arts? Let's just spar as usual. There are so many of us here. How can we just watch as something happens to Yuqi? It's the same at the God Weapon Convention. I'm not afraid of you being strong, but I'm afraid you're not strong enough." With Guan Xiyu's words, Si Ming nodded and said, "Let's begin." As soon as he said that, Zhong Ping's figure moved. Like a black shadow, he appeared in front of Yuqi in an instant. The strange weapon in his hand that looked like a saber and a sword suddenly erupted with a blood-red color. Strands of blood-red threads wrapped around it as if they were alive. It was extremely terrifying. Seeing this scene, the originally lazy Xiao Yi was slightly surprised. "You even taught him the bloody ancient pagoda? This evil technique of yours eats away at flesh and blood and consumes one's lifespan. He's your personal disciple. You taught him such an evil technique at such a young age?" Si Ming's expression did not change. He said emotionlessly, "It's precisely because he's my personal disciple that I taught him the bloody ancient pagoda. There's danger everywhere in the pugilistic world. Only those who can survive have the right to think about how to live longer. Those who die prematurely will die no matter what. The bloody ancient pagoda does indeed need flesh and blood to be fed, but as long as he can survive and cultivate to a level stronger than me, he'll naturally have a way to find heavenly resources to replenish his lost lifespan. On the other hand, if he can't cultivate to my level even after learning the bloody ancient pagoda, it proves that he's trash. What difference does it make if he dies earlier or later?" Hearing Si Ming's fallacious reasoning, Xiao Yi could not help but roll his eyes. He did not say anything else. The people from the Criminal Investigation Department were all monsters. They could not be understood by normal people. Meanwhile, facing Zhong Ping's terrifying attack, Yuqi's hand surged with stellar energy as he drew a strange hand seal. In an instant, the aura around him became incomparably majestic. He wrapped his arms around Zhong Ping's strange saber and trapped it in the middle. He was as immovable as a mountain, and his aura was incomparably steady. Seeing this, Xiao Yi's interest was piqued. He chuckled at Guan Siyu and said, "Moving mountains of the 9 transformations divine power? Hall Master, how much did you teach Yuqi about the 9 transformations divine power?" Guan Siyu shook her head. "Not much. I only taught him 3 forms." Xiao Yi smiled and said, "You taught Yuqi 3 moves. That Yuqi must have learned them to the point of proficiency. I know Hall Master's routine, you will certainly make Yuqi's foundation incomparably solid. Only then will you teach him the next move." Guan Siyu's secret technique, the 9 transformations divine power, encompassed heaven and earth, and turned the rotten into the divine power. It was very famous in the Guanzhong torture room. With Yuqi's current strength, it was already impressive that he could learn 3 forms. At this moment, Xiao Yi was also looking at the battlefield, the corners of his mouth curling into a mysterious smile. The moving mountains of the 9 transformations divine power was not used for defense. Zhong Ping was going to be unlucky. Sure enough, after Yuqi's powerful Gang Qi shackled the long saber, he raised his hands. In an instant, a powerful Gang Qi rose from the ground. The invisible and intangible Gang Qi seemed to turn into a substance, smashing towards Zhong Ping. At this moment, the long saber in Zhong Ping's hand exploded with a glaring blood-red light. Countless blood-red threads flourished. As his saber aura slashed, the surrounding stellar energy actually began to dissolve. The saber was like a clay ox entering the sea, slashing toward Yuqi without any obstruction. Yuqi's eyes revealed a look of surprise. He stretched out his hands and instantly, a dark blue stellar energy erupted like a vast ocean. In the depths, Zhong Ping seemed to be in the eye of the sea whirlpool. His body was involuntarily pulled to the sides along with the stellar energy. If it was a warrior with weaker strength, he might even be directly pulled into a pile of minced meat by the stellar energy whirlpool. 9 transformations see stirring divine power. Looking at Yuqi and Zhong Ping in the field, Chu Xiu's eyes revealed a look of surprise. It seemed that he had underestimated the Guanzhong torture room in the past. Among the younger generation, the Guanzhong torture room also had crouching tigers and hidden dragons. For example, Yuqi and Zhong Ping were fully qualified to be on the Longhu list. It was just that they stayed in the Guanzhong Pass and did not choose to venture out, so they seemed somewhat unknown. Moreover, the depth of Yuqi's foundation was beyond Chu Xiu's imagination. Originally, Chu Xiu thought that his cultivation of the Xiantian skill had a deep enough foundation, but Yuqi's foundation was even more solid than Chu Xiu's. Otherwise, he would definitely not be able to erupt with such a powerful stellar energy. The 9 transformations divine power was Guan Siyu's cultivation method. Every move required a strong stellar energy and the control of stellar energy as the foundation. Guan Siyu had only taught Yuqi the 3 moves, not because he was afraid that his master would starve to death if he taught his disciple, but because if Yuqi were to forcefully use the other moves, he would probably suffer a backlash. At this moment, Yuqi's sea-stirring divine power turned the situation around, but at this time, Zhong Ping formed a seal with one hand. It was a very strange seal. It looked like a Buddhist seal, but it did not. As the seal unfolded, Zhong Ping's body suddenly shone with a blood-red light. But in the blood-red light, there was a Buddha figure lingering, appearing sacred and evil. When the saber slashed down, the Buddha figure behind Zhong Ping merged into the saber, causing the entire saber to turn scarlet like flowing blood. The saber momentum fell, and the sea-stirring divine power shattered. Yuqi could not help but exclaim, "Stupa chop." Are you crazy? Yuqi recognized this saber technique. When he first joined the Guanzhong torture room, Si Ming was not yet an expert at the unity of heaven and man realm. He was only at the 5 Chi's origin realm. However, he had used this stupa slash to severely injure an expert in the realm of oneness of heaven and man and kill him in the end. However, the consequences were also very serious. He had been seriously injured by the backlash and had been bedridden for several months, almost dying. Seeing that Zhong Ping had even used a forbidden move like the stupa chop, Yuqi did not even use the third move of the 9 transformations divine power. He immediately shouted, "I admit defeat. I admit defeat." Actually, Yuqi did not care much about the quota to represent the Guanzhong Discipline Hall in the God Weapon Conference. He was originally the kind of person who kept a low profile. He only cared about the internal affairs of the Guanzhong Discipline Hall. He did not want to get involved in the affairs of the outside world. Moreover, even if he could really represent the Guanzhong torture room in the God Weapon Conference, more than half of the young talents in the pugilistic world would be gathered there. Yuqi was not confident that he would stand out. Moreover, he did not use any weapons. Would he have to recultivate his martial arts after obtaining the God Weapon? However, although Yuqi had already shouted for him to stop, Zhong Ping's stupa chop was still slashing towards him. It was not that Zhong Ping wanted to kill Yuqi, but this move of his was a forbidden move with a deep backlash. It was easy to use, but it would be difficult to withdraw it. At this moment, Shao Yi, who was closest to them, suddenly made a move. He waved his hand, and in an instant, 7 different colored sword chis burst out, blocking in front of Zhong Ping. Among them, the green and white sword chis entered Zhong Ping's body, causing his chi and blood to flow in reverse, and forcibly suppressing the backlash of his saber. Chapter 204. There were several experts at the unity of man and nature realm in the entire martial arts field. There was also Guan Siyu, a grandmaster who had condensed the martial path true elixir. No matter how intense the competition between the 2 juniors was, there wouldn't be any problems. After stopping Zhong Ping, Shao Yi couldn't help but say, "I say, can you not learn from your master? It's just a competition. Why are you risking your life?" Yuqi nodded repeatedly. He wouldn't compete with such a lunatic next time. "Even if you don't want your life, I still want it." Zhong Ping said coldly, "I learned a killing technique. If I don't use my full strength, I might as well admit defeat." Shao Yi's temper was not bad. He didn't lower himself to the level of this junior. He just shook his head and said, "Fine, another stubborn one. Just like your master." At this time, Si Ming said, "Go and thank Lord Shao. If Lord Shao hadn't used you with sword chi and light sword chi to suppress the backlash of your blood Buddha, even if you won, you wouldn't be able to fight the next round." Zhong Ping immediately turned around and bowed to Shao Yi, "Thank you, Lord Shao." Shao Yi snorted and said, "Don't thank me, kid. If you play like this next time, I won't care anymore. Let the others do it." Guan Siyu coughed and said, "Okay, let's move on to the next round." Although his personal disciple, Yuqi, lost the competition, Guan Siyu didn't care at all. Everyone present also knew Guan Siyu's character. She was absolutely impartial. A competition was a competition. Even Yuqi himself didn't expect to get any preferential treatment. Of course, it was the same for others. As long as they were in front of Guan Siyu, they couldn't think of cheating through the person behind them. It was a fair competition, and everyone was treated equally. The second group was Yin Butong's disciple, Li Tianhao, and Chu Simo's disciple, Chu Xiaoda. Chu Xiaoda was Chu Simo's adopted son, and he was also from the western regions. However, he was raised by Chu Simo since he was young. Apart from his appearance, he almost didn't look similar to a western region's person. Chu Xiaoda cupped his hands at Li Tianhao and said, "Brother Li, please advise me. Li Tianhao laughed coldly. His eyes revealed a sliver of contempt and disdain as he said, "Something that can be settled in a few moves, what's there to talk about? If you surrender quickly, you'll be at ease, and I'll be at ease." The Central Plains had always discriminated against the foreign tribes of the western regions. Li Tianhao had not interacted much with Chu Xiaoda before, but he looked down on him from the bottom of his heart. He was just a poor slave from the western regions. What qualifications did he have to be compared with him? If it weren't for the fact that there were so many important people present today, Li Tianhao was afraid that it wouldn't be a good influence. Who knew, he might have said something nasty. But even so, Chu Xiaoda could feel the contempt and disdain in Li Tianhao's tone and gaze. This caused him to clench his fists tightly. In terms of status, he was the adopted son of Guanbei's punishment master Chu Simo, and his status was even higher than Yang Ling's. Chu Simo was not Wei Jiuduan, who would be so harsh and heartless to his adopted son. But even so, it couldn't change his identity as a foreign tribe of the western regions. In the Guanbei region, because of Chu Simo's identity, there was less discrimination. But once he went outside, facing someone like Li Tianhao, whose status was not inferior to his, Chu Xiaoda could do nothing. Looking at Li Tianhao, Chu Xiaoda said coldly, "I'd like to see if you can finish me in a few moves today." As he spoke, Chu Xiaoda drew a broadsword from his back. In an instant, the Gang Qi around his body erupted. The misty Gang Qi seemed incomparably heavy. When the sword slashed down, it was like a storm sweeping through, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. The martial arts of the western regions were famous for their strangeness, but Chu Xiaoda's martial arts were inherited from Chu Simo, and Chu Simo had not learned the martial arts of the western regions. Before he was rescued by Chu Kuanga, he was just an ordinary slave. How could he be qualified to learn martial arts? Therefore, Chu Simo's martial arts were some ordinary techniques that he learned in the Guanzhong torture room. With the accumulation of his merits, he exchanged for some powerful techniques from the Guanzhong torture room. Then, he was given some pointers by Chu Kuanga, and finally integrated with his own understanding of martial arts. Only then did he come up with his current martial arts. Although it was a little complicated, he had a general framework of martial arts. Now, Chu Xiaoda's attacks were the same. He was like Chu Simo, imposing and upright. However, when he saw Chu Xiaoda's attacks, Chu Xiao frowned slightly. Chu Xiaoda's strength could not be said to be weak, but it was too uncharacteristic. Overly upright martial arts must be imposing and majestic to the extreme, directly crushing everything with power, destroying evil and slaying demons, to the point where there was no weakness. This was Chu Kuanga's style in the past, and that was because he was strong enough. Now, Chu Xiaoda was also using this style of martial arts. In a real battle, he was 100% inferior to Zhongping and Yuqi. At this time, when Li Tianhao saw Chu Xiaoda's attack, he could not help but sneer disdainfully. A huge curved machete was held in Li Tianhao's hand. Invisible Gang Qi exploded around his body, and his figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. To be precise, his speed was extremely fast. In the next moment, his figure had already arrived in front of Chu Xiaoda. The machete in his hand bloomed with a dazzling sharpness, and it slashed down, directly tearing apart Chu Xiaoda's sword momentum, forcing him to withdraw his sword momentum to defend. This move is called breaking the moon. Li Tianhao laughed sinisterly. The blade was like the moon, extremely sharp, and had the terrifying power to tear apart Gang Qi. After Chu Xiaoda barely managed to block that strike, the saber in Li Tianhao's hand changed, and instantly transformed into tens of thousands of saber shadows, real and fake, real and fake. Some were saber shadows imitated by Gang Qi, while others were saber shadows slashed out at an extreme speed. This move is called cutting wind. In the sky full of saber shadows, Chu Xiaoda was forced to retreat step by step. He did not have the slightest ability to fight back, and he could not even display his sword momentum. A cold look appeared in Li Tianhao's eyes, and the long saber in his hand suddenly bloomed with an extremely dazzling light. It became incomparably magnificent, and at the same time, revealed a shocking killing intent. This move is called Frightening Dragon. The extreme sublimation of the saber was incomparably brilliant, and the sharpness even made Chu Xiu look askance, let alone Chu Xiaoda. Under the attack, the long sword in Chu Xiaoda's hand was directly knocked away. Before the saber reached him, the extreme sharpness had already seeped into his body, causing him to spit out blood. However, Li Tianhao had no intention of withdrawing his saber. At this moment, Chu Simo's figure moved, and in the next moment, he had already appeared in front of Chu Xiaoda. He grabbed the machete with one hand, and bursts of gang qi burst out. Chu Simo did not move at all. Even though Li Tianhao had used all his strength and burst out all his gang qi, the long saber seemed to have grown out of Chu Simo's hand, and did not move at all. Chu Simo took a deep look at Li Tianhao, and said indifferently, "We've lost. Where it is possible, one should be lenient." Li Tianhao hurriedly retracted his gang qi, and said with a smile, "Official Chu, please don't take it to heart. Sabers and swords have no eyes, and my attack was a fatal one. Just like Brother Zhong just now, I can't retract it for a while." Everyone present was an expert, so how could they not see through each other's background? Zhong Pingfu really couldn't retract his slaughter slash, but Li Tianhao had done it on purpose. However, sabers and swords had no eyes, and fists and feet had no hearts. This was what Guan Siyu had said just now, so no one could criticize Li Tianhao just because of this. Furthermore, looking at Yin Butong's expression, he did not seem to be apologetic at all. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. From this, he could tell the status of the 4 disciplinary officers present. Among them, the one with the strongest overall strength and influence should be Xiao Yi. Not only was he the strongest, but he was also in his prime, so no one dared to provoke him. Next was Yin Batong. He had the most seniority, and he was not considered old either. Before Guan Siyu was the hall leader, he had already been a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room. Just by looking at Li Tianhao's posture, one could tell how powerful Yin Batong was on a daily basis. Ranked 3rd should be Chu Simo. He was actually not that old and was in his prime, but he was also very experienced. After all, he had been brought up by Chu Kuanga, so he was of the same generation as Guan Siyu. However, his identity as a foreigner from the western regions was a little sensitive and awkward. This also caused his status in the Guanzhong torture room to be lower than that of the other disciplinary officers. As for Wei Jiuduan, his status was comparable to Yin Butong's in the past, but he was now an old man who was about to retire. His vitality was declining, and his status was about to be lost. Naturally, he was ranked at the bottom. At this moment, Chu Xiaoda had been easily defeated by Li Tianhao. Li Tianhao's words were true, it was a matter that could be settled in a few moves. This was a huge slap in the face. Chu Xiaoda wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said to Chu Simo in a low voice, "Godfather, I have embarrassed you." Chu Simo's expression did not show any emotions. He only patted Chu Xiaoda's shoulder and said, "Victory and defeat are common in war. Don't worry about it. This is also a form of training for you." With that, Chu Simo led Chu Xiaoda back to their seats. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu suddenly felt that Chu Simo was a little scary. Li Tianhao's humiliation towards Chu Xiaoda and his disdain and contempt towards the foreigners from the western regions were all displayed on his face. Even after Chu Simo attacked, Li Tianhao dared to unleash all the stellar energy in his body to take him head-on. Strictly speaking, this was already somewhat disrespectful. As Li Tianhao's master, Yin Batong just stood there and watched without the slightest expression. His attitude was also overflowing. If it were anyone else, even if they did not explode on the spot, they would definitely be furious. However, looking at Chu Simo now, Chu Xiaoda, who was behind him, had a face full of grief and indignation. However, Chu Simo still had a calm expression, as if nothing had happened. Such a person who could endure was very terrifying. Chapter 205. After the 2 matches were over, the 3rd match was between Chu Xiu and Xiao Yi's disciple, Cheng Zhouhai. Xiao Yi had a frivolous expression, but his disciple, Cheng Zhouhai, was an honest-looking youth. After entering, Cheng Zhouhai laughed at Chu Xiu and cupped his hands, saying, "Hello, Brother Chu. The fight just now was a little too intense. It is just a spar, there is no need to be like this. Why don't we switch to a safer method to spar?" Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "Safer method? How?" Cheng Zhouhai smiled and said, "The most basic point to determine the strength between cultivators is strength. How about this, the 2 of us will fight each other. One will attack with full strength, and the other will defend with full strength. 1 round back and forth. It is simple and direct, and the winner will be determined immediately. What do you think?" Chu Xiu's expression was somewhat strange as he said, "Sure. Since Brother Cheng is interested, then let's do it this way." Cheng Zhouhai laughed loudly and said, "Since it is like this, then Brother Chu, you go first." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "There is no need. Brother Cheng, you are the one who suggested it, so you go first." Cheng Zhouhai chuckled and said, "Then I will not stand on ceremony." This competition was not anything serious. It was just to choose one person to represent the Guanzhong torture room at the Divine Weapon Conference to make their presence known. Hence, the 2 people in the field decided on the method of the competition. Both sides agreed, and Guan Siyu did not say much. However, Wei Jiuduan was anxious. He thought to himself, "Is this Chu Xiu stupid? Normally, he looks quite smart. Why is he so muddle-headed now? Whatever the other party says, it is what it is." At this time, even Xiao Yi looked at Wei Jiuduan and secretly transmitted his voice, "Old man Wei, you old fellow is very astute. How did you find such a naive fellow? Did you not tell him that Cheng Zhouhai was brought up by me? He even learned my myriad sword flow?" Wei Jiuduan glared at Xiao Yi. How would he know what was going on? Chu Xiu was naive? If he was simple, those forces in the Jianghu prefecture wouldn't have been destroyed. He didn't know if Chu Xiu was too arrogant this time, or if he was fooled by Cheng Zhouhai's simple and honest appearance. He actually agreed to this kind of thing. However, since both sides had already decided, Wei Jiuduan naturally couldn't stop them. At this moment, Cheng Zhouhai took a deep breath. He didn't have a sword in his hand, but his entire body was covered in sword qi. Strands of sword qi surged out from within him, and they formed a dense mass that enveloped his entire body. This was the ultimate technique that made Xiao Yi famous, the myriad sword style. According to legend, it came from the sacred land of the sword Dao, the forgotten sword cottage. This myriad sword flow was both a cultivation method and a martial skill. It could be said to be very strange. When a martial artist was cultivating, they would use a secret method to temper their stellar energy into sharp sword qi and store it in their body. In the end, the cultivator would no longer have any stellar energy, and their body would be filled with sword qi. This way, the opponent could directly use this sword qi to fight. However, if they wanted to cultivate other cultivation methods, they would have to destroy their own sword qi. This was a very extreme sword cultivation method. However, the more extreme this cultivation method was, the more powerful it was. Right now, Cheng Zhouhai could only condense a few hundred sword qi. Even Xiao Yi couldn't condense 10,000 sword qi. When this cultivation method reached the great accomplishment stage, it would have the power of 10,000 or even 100,000 sword qi. Moreover, during the tempering process, these sword qi could be given various attributes of power, just like the 7-colored sword qi that Xiao Yi used just now. At this moment, Cheng Zhouhai released all the sword qi in his body, causing the sword qi to slowly fuse into one. Finally, he himself transformed into a sword. The formless sword qi condensed in mid-air, finally condensing into a huge sword made of astral energy that was 30 meters long, slashing towards Chu Xiu. When cultivating the million sword style, one could transform stellar energy into sword qi. Now, he was transforming sword qi into stellar energy. The two could be transformed freely, but it took time. However, once these sword qi fused into one, the explosive power it brought was extremely shocking. At the very least, Cheng Zhouhai had never met a cultivator of the same level who could block this attack of his. Originally, he had made this suggestion half-jokingly to liven up the tense atmosphere just now. He didn't expect Chu Xiu to agree immediately. Since this was the case, then don't blame him for pushing the boat with the current. He had already won this round. The 10,000 sword style could shatter the heavens and split the earth. Right now, Cheng Zhouhai's hundreds of swords had merged into one. The huge power caused the expressions of Li Tianhao and the other junior cultivators to change slightly. In the face of such an attack, they could only delay and dodge. If they were to block it with all their strength, they would probably be seriously injured even if they didn't die. If this Chu Xiu was a little smarter, he would have taken the initiative to admit defeat after seeing this sword and switched to attacking. Otherwise, if he were to forcefully resist it, he probably wouldn't even have the chance to attack later on. However, at this moment, in the arena, Chu Xiu didn't have the slightest intention of admitting defeat. The stellar energy around his body suddenly exploded. His hands formed a seal, and in an instant, a thick and dense stellar energy enveloped his body. It was as solid as a fortress and as immovable as a mountain. Lin character formula, Dugu In. This was the strongest defensive move in the 9 words formula of fast and slow. Chu Xiu had already used it many times. Although it could only defend passively, unlike the Buddhist cross-training golden body that directly increased the strength of one's body, in terms of blocking the opponent's powerful attacks, especially in terms of the defense of stellar energy, Dugu In could be said to be the strongest existence among those of the same level. In the past, even the Heavenly Sin branch leader's divine black spatial claw could be blocked by Chu Xiu's Dugu In with all his might. Could Cheng Zhouhai's million sword flow be stronger than the Heavenly Sin branch leader's divine black spatial claw? The crowd heard a violent explosion of stellar energy in the arena. In an instant, gravel flew up from the ground and cracks exploded. The scene was extremely chaotic. One had to know that this was the headquarters martial arts arena. The ground was paved with high-quality stones, and there was even an array buried underground. It was incomparably sturdy. Yet, it was still shattered by the explosion. One could imagine how strong the shockwaves from the exchange between the two were. When the smoke and dust dissipated, the crowd couldn't help but have a slight change in expression when they saw the scene. Chu Xiu stood there unscathed, while Cheng Zhouhai's expression was dull. Even his arm was slightly trembling from the recoil of the stellar energy. This Chu Xiu actually blocked his attack so easily? At this moment, Cheng Zhouhai felt as if he had done something stupid. It wasn't Chu Xiu who was naive, but him. Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Brother Cheng, are you ready?" "It's my turn." Cheng Zhouhai forced a smile and said, "Brother Chu, just make your move." Right now, Cheng Zhouhai could only hope that this Chu Xiu was good at defensive secret techniques. His attack power shouldn't be too strong. Otherwise, he would definitely lose. Sword Qi burst out from Cheng Zhouhai's body and formed a sword shield in front of him. He was taught by Shao Yi and learned the million sword flow, which was an extreme technique. It also meant that he couldn't learn other techniques. In terms of attack, the million sword flow's strength was obvious to all. But how many swordsmen were good at defense? They were all good at attacking. Therefore, Cheng Zhouhai's defensive methods could be said to be pitifully few. He could only place the sword Qi in front of him and form a sword shield to block. This time, Chu Xiu didn't use a killer move like the Avicii 3 blades. To him, the outcome was already decided. He didn't have any enmity with Cheng Zhouhai, so there was no need to use such extreme martial arts. Therefore, Chu Xiu only formed the great Vajra seal. In an instant, golden stellar energy burst out and blasted towards Cheng Zhouhai with unparalleled power. Moreover, this great Vajra seal not only contained the power of the fast and slow 9 words formula, but also the power of the great chaos of heaven and earth chaos technique. The beginning of all things, infinite chaos. The power of the great chaos origin technique of heaven and earth turbidity caused the great Vajra seal to become incomparably heavy. Its power was restrained and steady, but when it struck Cheng Zhouhai's sword and shield, it exploded with a loud bang. In the blink of an eye, Cheng Zhouhai felt an unparalleled force coming towards him. It was so strong that he didn't even dare to think of resisting. Cheng Zhouhai frantically urged the sword qi in his body to resist, but it was instantly disintegrated by the strong force. His body was directly blasted into the ground, and the gravel under his feet flew everywhere. His figure retreated as if he was plowing the ground, bringing up countless gravel and dust. Finally, with a loud explosion, Cheng Zhouhai's sword shield was shattered, and his body flew back more than 10 feet before he managed to stop. But at this time, his face was abnormally red. Obviously, his internal organs had been shaken by Chu Xiu's great Vajra seal. After a long while, Cheng Zhouhai finally suppressed the aftereffects and cupped his hands towards Chu Xiu with a bitter smile. "Thank you for showing mercy, Brother Chu. I've lost this round." He knew that this time, Chu Xiu had really shown mercy, because he saw the red sleeve saber hanging on Chu Xiu's waist. He didn't think that Chu Xiu's saber was used as a decoration. A warrior who used a saber, but now he was beaten to this state by a seal. It was needless to say how terrifying Chu Xiu's saber would be when he used it. Moreover, the other people present were also looking at Chu Xiu in surprise. As for Chu Xiu, because he had just joined the Guanzhong torture room, even if he was recommended to enter the Guanzhong torture room by Chu Yuansheng, the people present really didn't know much about him. Now it seemed that Chu Xiu's strength was really worthy of his ranking on the Longhu list. Xiao Yi sized up Chu Xiu and said to Cheng Zhouhai, "All right, don't embarrass yourself. Now you know that it's not good to play tricks, right? You don't cultivate normally and only think about these useless things." Cheng Zhouhai laughed awkwardly and said, "Brother Chu's strength is so strong. If we really fought, I would also lose. Furthermore, I would easily get injured. Testing each other out is simple and convenient, and saves a lot of trouble." Xiao Yi glared at him and said, "You still dare to talk back, brat? Wait and see how I train you when we go back." When Cheng Zhouhai heard this, he immediately shrunk his neck. It was obvious that he thought of some bad memories. On the other side, Wei Jiuduan laughed proudly. This Chu Xiu really didn't disappoint him and gave him a lot of face. As he said, this Chu Xiu was very shrewd previously. There was no reason for him to be so stupid after coming to the headquarters. Chapter 206. In this match, Chu Xiu had shown brilliantly, exceeding everyone's expectations. This also made Wei Jiuduan very proud. In recent years, his strength had been lacking, and it was almost time for him to retire. His presence in the Guanzhong torture hall could be said to be extremely low, to the point where he was even ridiculed by the old ghost Yin Batong. Now that Chu Xiu was in the limelight, it naturally meant that he, as his superior, was in the limelight as well, even though Chu Xiu's strength had nothing to do with him. Yin Batong looked at Wei Jiuduan's proud look and couldn't help but snort. "What are you so proud of? No matter how proud you are, you won't last long. In the future, when we meet, won't you still have to obediently call me Lord?" As he spoke, Yin Batong looked at Li Tianhao and asked, "Are you confident that you can defeat Chu Xiu later?" Li Tianhao laughed coldly. "Chu Xiu's attacks are indeed fierce and violent. His strength and defense are at the pinnacle of the physical invulnerability stage. But in a real fight, what's the use of strength and defense? He can't defeat me with brute force alone. Yin Badong nodded and revealed a ruthless look in his eyes. It's good that you are confident. Teach Chu Xiu a lesson and teach that old guy Wei Jiuduan a lesson. Li Tianhao nodded and revealed a cold smile at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't too sure what the conflict between his master and Wei Jiuduan was, but it seemed that they had been enemies for a long time. But this wasn't important. Li Tianhao only knew that if he could teach Chu Xiu a lesson today, he would definitely be rewarded in the future. That was enough. Now that there were 3 people who advanced, the battle was too chaotic. Therefore, the 3 of them drew lots. 2 would fight first, and 1 would have a bye. Then, the winner would be decided. After drawing lots, Zhong Ping was lucky enough to have a bye. His opponent was Chu Xiu and Li Tianhao. Looking at Chu Xiu, Li Tianhao smiled sinisterly and made a throat-slitting gesture at him secretly. Chu Xiu glanced at him. This person had an impetuous nature, which could be seen from his battle with Chu Xiaoda just now. However, this was not a shortcoming. There were many arrogant people in the Jianghu, some even more arrogant than Li Tianhao. However, the problem was that you could be arrogant and proud, but you had to know what respect was. It was obvious that Li Tianhao did not have any respect in his heart. Just now, he had even dared to disrespect Chu Simo, a great expert at the one with the world realm. One could only imagine what he was thinking. However, none of this was important. Later, Chu Xiu would let Li Tianhao know what it meant to be odd. After entering the arena, Li Tianhao laughed coldly at Chu Xiu and said, "Brat, I heard that you were once in the top 20 of the Longhu leaderboard. However, don't think that just because you entered the Longhu leaderboard that you are invincible among your peers. There are countless young talents in this world. Some of them have never shown their faces in the Jianghu, but that doesn't mean that they are weak." Chu Xiu said lightly, "Are you talking about yourself?" Li Tianhao only laughed coldly and did not answer. Although that was what he meant, he was not arrogant enough to say that all the talents on the Longhu leaderboard were trash and were inferior to him in front of everyone. Therefore, after laughing coldly, he directly slashed at Chu Xiu with the machete in his hand. His figure was like a black shadow, appearing in front of Chu Xiu in an instant. The light from the machete was dazzling. In that instant, the power of the machete was like the descent of the moon and stars. It was incomparably dazzling and swift. Although his tone was somewhat disdainful of Chu Xiu, in reality, he also knew that in terms of strength, he would not be able to defeat Chu Xiu no matter what. He had already seen the power of Chu Xiu's great King Kong will seal just now. If it was him, he would not be able to block it either. Therefore, Li Tianhao only had one thing to rely on, his speed and his swift machete. However, just as his machete was about to fall, he saw a mocking smile at the corner of Chu Xiu's mouth. In the next moment, Chu Xiu had already formed a seal with one hand. The seal was completed in an instant. A light green gang qi exploded under Chu Xiu's feet. In the next moment, Chu Xiu's figure had already disappeared in front of Li Tianhao's eyes. Formation Formula: Internal Binding Seal. Main disease: I am unstoppable in the universe. The internal binding seal was not very useful in a long-distance attack. However, in a short fight like this, the speed that the internal binding seal could unleash could be said to be shocking. In that instant, Li Tianhao was shocked by the speed that Chu Xiu had unleashed. Before he could turn around, he felt that there were countless menacing saber aura attacking him from behind. Chu Xiu's figure had already appeared behind Li Tianhao. The red sleeve saber appeared in his hand. With a slash, the refined blood divine power exploded. The saber aura fell like a continuous drizzle. It was extremely fast and dense. Li Tianhao shouted angrily. He turned around and countless saber shadows erupted from the machete in his hand. The speed of the wind slasher was indeed shocking. It was even faster than Chu Xiu's red sleeve saber of the dusk drizzle. However, the problem was that Li Tianhao was only good at movement and swift machete. His own inner force cultivation and gang qi could not be said to be weak. They could only be said to be ordinary. And now, what Chu Xiu was using was the refined blood divine power. The secret gang qi secret technique of the Blood River sect in the past was a powerful existence that was comparable to the White Tiger killing divine power of the White Tiger Hall and the pure yang gang qi of the Chunyang Dao sect. In that instant, everyone saw that the Crimson Saber shadow had the upper hand in the explosion of gang qi. It forced Li Tianhao to retreat again and again. He did not even have a chance to fight back. At this moment, everyone looked at Chu Xiu in a different light. Even Guan Xiu looked at Chu Xiu in the same way. If the power that Chu Xiu had displayed in the battle against Cheng Zhouhai had surprised them, then the power that Chu Xiu had displayed now had shocked them. Although the power that Chu Xiu had displayed before was strong, they were all experts in the oneness of heaven and human realm. Guan Xiu, a grandmaster who had condensed the martial path true elixir, was there. What had they not seen? And now, Chu Xiu had displayed such a terrifying movement technique and swift and fierce saber aura. What did this mean? It meant that there was almost no weakness in Chu Xiu's body. When warriors fought, everyone would use their strengths to attack their opponent's weaknesses. However, when facing a warrior like Chu Xiu, who was extremely powerful and had a strong defense, even his movement technique and attack speed were so fast, how could one fight him? No martial artist wanted to face such a person, because it would only bring them despair. Moreover, they did not know that Chu Xiu had also cultivated the soul-shifting technique of extinguishing heaven and extinguishing earth. This meant that even if his opponent was proficient in rare spiritual attacks, Chu Xiu would still be invulnerable in front of him. Anyone would feel despair when facing such an existence. This was what Li Tianhao was feeling now. Before the fight started, he had already planned to use his movement technique and swift saber to gain the initiative and not give Chu Xiu a chance. In the end, he did not expect that it would be Chu Xiu who would not give him a chance. Li Tianhao suddenly shouted angrily. He displayed his movement technique to the extreme. Even Chu Xiu's continuous drizzling saber aura could not stop Li Tianhao. After breaking through Chu Xiu's saber aura and arriving in front of Chu Xiu, the scimitar in Li Tianhao's hand flashed with a shocking sharpness. As the saber slashed down, endless gang qi condensed into a line and slashed down with an indomitable momentum. Even the air was slashed by this saber, causing a sonic boom. One could imagine how fast this saber was. Facing Li Tianhao's saber, Chu Xiu suddenly raised his head, causing Li Tianhao's heart to skip a beat. What he saw was a pair of emotionless eyes surrounded by boundless black fog. The desire to die exploded, and the hatred was monstrous. The Avicii demonic saber slashed down, as if the gates of hell had opened and hundreds of ghosts walked in the night. When Chu Xiu and Cheng Zhouhai fought just now, because there was no enmity between them, Chu Xiu did not use the extreme three blades of Avicii. However, Wei Jiuduan had said that if he crippled Li Tianhao, the two prefectures under Kai Jingsheng's jurisdiction would be his. It was such a good deal. It was rare for a stingy and mean guy like Wei Jiuduan to personally offer it to him. Chu Xiu naturally would not refuse. As the saber slashed down, the pitch-black saber aura devoured everything. The saber aura in Li Tianhao's hand shattered, and even the precious weapon in his hand was slashed into pieces with a loud bang. Before the saber reached him, Li Tianhao immediately exploded with his fastest speed and retreated. However, Chu Xiu's saber aura had already entered his body, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. At this time, Chu Xiu directly formed the inner binding seal. His figure moved, and in an instant, he appeared in front of Li Tianhao. The great SwordWill seal directly smashed down on Li Tianhao. The eyebrows of everyone present immediately jumped. What was Chu Xiu trying to do? After this slash, there was no longer any suspense in the outcome. Chu Xiu was simply crushing Li Tianhao, yet he still made a move now. Was he preparing to follow Li Tianhao's example just now and be ruthless in killing him? Yin Baotong saw this scene and immediately snorted coldly. A cold glint appeared in his eyes. This Chu Xiu still dared to be so insolent in front of him. He was practically courting death. His figure moved, wanting to stop Chu Xiu and teach him a lesson. However, at this time, Wei Jiuduan suddenly slashed down with his palm. Strong earth energy condensed in midair like a dragon's claw, slapping down in front of Yin Baotong and forcing him to retreat. Yin Baotong shouted angrily, "Wei Jiuduan! What are you trying to do? Is this a spar or a killing match?" Wei Jiuduan said calmly, "Your disciple hasn't even admitted defeat. What are you so anxious about? If you want to admit defeat, your disciple might even want to struggle a little." With regards to Wei Jiuduan's actions, no one present said anything. Didn't Li Tianhao also attack Chu Xiao viciously just now? Yin Baotong didn't stop him either. Guan Xiyu's attitude was that she only cared about the results and not the process. Moreover, the Guanzhong torture room wasn't a martial arts sect or aristocratic family that required their disciples to love each other. Although it was a spar, as long as no lives were lost, everything was fine. Li Tianhao wasn't dead yet, so what was the rush? Chapter 207. From the moment Yin Baotong made his move to the moment Wei Jiuduan stopped him, both sides had only used a few words. However, in a battle of life and death, victory and defeat could often be decided with just a few words. Right now, it was the same for Chu Xiu and Li Tianhao. Without a weapon and having been seriously injured by Chu Xiu's 3 blades of Avici, Li Tianhao directly vomited blood under Chu Xiu's great SwordWill imprint. His arms were twisted and fractured. However, this was not the end. Chu Xiu used the great abandoned capturing hand and pulled Li Tianhao back. His hands twisted his tendons and bones, directly breaking his legs. After Li Tianhao let out a miserable howl, he was thrown to the side by Chu Xiu and fainted on the ground. Cheng Zhouhai, who was at the side, could not help but shiver when he saw this scene. Li Tianhao was seriously injured and his limbs were all crippled. Although his life was not in danger, his cultivation would be crippled even after he recovered. Unless Yin Baotong could find an extremely precious 8-revolution pill to reconnect his bones and meridians, it was unknown whether Li Tianhao could maintain his Xiantian realm cultivation. Seeing the disciple that he had carefully nurtured being crippled by Chu Xiu, Yin Baotong was enraged and wanted to attack Chu Xiu. However, if Wei Jiuduan allowed him to attack Chu Xiu in public, where would he put his face? With a cold snort, Wei Jiuduan displayed his famous ultimate skill, the dragon-chasing hand. His astral energy transformed into a dragon claw. The powerful astral energy directly sealed in front of Chu Xiu, blocking Yin Baotong's path. Yin Baotong, you still want to attack a junior in front of the hall master and the other disciplinary officers? Do you still care about the rules of the Guanzhong torture room? Do you still care about the hall master? Wei Jiuduan said with a sneer. Yin Baotong said with hatred, this kid actually crippled Tianhao in a competition. Who is the one who doesn't care about the hall master? Who doesn't care about the Guanzhong torture room? Wei Jiuduan said indifferently, sabers and swords have no eyes, fists and feet have no heart. It's normal to get injured in a sparring match between warriors. Just now, your disciple almost crippled Chu Xiao. Why didn't you say anything? At this time, Chu Xiu also had an apologetic expression as he cupped his hands and said, "Please forgive me, Lord Yin. I have cultivated a few demonic arts in the past. Just like the previous saber strike, the backlash on my body is a little big, so I couldn't control myself, causing my attack to be careless and injuring Brotherly. Later, I will have someone send some good Jinshuang medicine to Brotherly." When everyone present heard this, a strange expression appeared on their faces. This Chu Xiu was definitely doing this on purpose. How was Li Tianhao injured? He was clearly crippled. Not to mention Jinchuang medicine, even the Tianshan snow lotus could not heal him. Yin Batong was so angry that he wanted to say something, but at this time, Guan Siyu frowned and said indifferently, "All right, let's forget about this matter. Pay attention when you make a move next time." To Guan Siyu, he was aware of the relationship between the torturers of the Guanzhong torture room, but he had never bothered about it. The Guanzhong torture room accepted countless people from all over the world. Some of these people came from sects, while others came from the wilderness. Everyone's personality was different, so it was naturally impossible for them to love each other. Some sects and aristocratic families even had internal strife. Therefore, Guan Siyu only had one request. That was to make a ruckus, but no one was allowed to make a big deal out of it. The Guanzhong torture room absolutely did not allow internal strife. At this time, when he heard Guan Siyu's words, Yin Batong could only snort coldly and return to his seat. Naturally, Wei Jiuduan had a smug look on his face. After being ridiculed by Yin Batong for so long, he finally made a comeback this time. At this time, Chu Xiu felt that someone was looking at him. He turned around and saw that Mei Qinglian, who was sitting next to Guan Siyu, had a strange look in her beautiful eyes as she looked at Chu Xiu. When she saw Chu Xiu's gaze, Mei Qinglian smiled sweetly at him. It was abnormally dazzling and made people feel dizzy. She was extremely charming. Chu Xiu frowned. His mental strength was powerful, so he was not affected. When he looked again, Mei Qinglian's gaze had already turned elsewhere. Chu Xiu could not see through this woman, but this woman was definitely not a simple existence. He could tell from Chu Yuancheng's attitude in the past. In Chu Xiu's opinion, Chu Yuancheng not only respected Mei Qinglian as a sister-in-law, but there was also a faint sense of fear. He did not know why. Later, when Chu Xiu came to the Guanzhong torture room, he went to look for Chu Yuancheng for a drink. Even at the wine table, Chu Yuancheng did not talk about Mei Qinglian. As long as Chu Xiu mentioned her name, Chu Yuancheng would change the topic. This made Chu Xiu feel that it was a little strange. After everyone was seated, Guan Siyu got someone to carry Li Tianhao away for treatment. She said to Chu Xiu, "Now, only you and Zhong Ping are left. However, you just fought with Li Tianhao. To be fair, you should rest for 2 hours before you fight." Before Chu Xiu could say anything, Zhong Ping suddenly said, "There is no need to rest. I admit defeat for this round." When he said this, everyone present looked at Zhong Ping in surprise. To be honest, most of the young ancient martial art practitioners from the Guanzhong torture room were not interested in representing the Guanzhong torture room to participate in the God Weapon Conference. The rule of the Guanzhong torture room was to speak according to one's contributions. Hence, they did not care much about the reputation of the outside world. Moreover, the God Weapon Conference this time was a gathering of young talents. Even if they went, the God Weapon would most likely not fall into their hands. Why would they fight so hard? However, they did not care about these things. However, they still cared about the reputation of the Guanzhong torture room. For example, who was strong and who was weak in the Guanzhong torture room, and so on. Zhong Ping did not seem like the kind of person who did not care about fame and fortune. Could it be that he really did not want the title of the number one among the younger generation in the Guanzhong torture room? Was he prepared to give it to Chu Xiu for free? Looking at everyone's gaze, Zhong Ping said indifferently, "He is too strong. We cannot defeat him in a normal fight. If we fight with our lives on the line, it is uncertain whether we will survive. Since that is the case, what is the point of fighting?" It was reasonable for Zhong Ping to take the initiative to admit defeat. After all, everyone present had seen Chu Xiu's strength. He was indeed so strong that it made people feel hopeless. Li Tianhao, who had easily crushed Chu Xiaoda, was easily crushed by Chu Xiu. In the end, he was even crippled by Chu Xiu. The ranking on the Longhu leaderboard was not just for show. Guan Xiu said in a low voice, since that is the case, then Chu Xiu will represent the Guanzhong torture room in the God Weapon Conference this time. It is not important whether we can get the first place or not. What is important is to let the people in the pugilistic world see the power of the Guanzhong torture room. You should be aware of this. Chu Xiu cupped his hands and said, "Yes, Hall Master." He understood what Guan Xiu meant. She wanted to make the Guanzhong torture room known. She wanted them to see that the next generation of the Guanzhong torture room was capable. In fact, in Chu Xiu's opinion, the younger generation of the Guanzhong torture room was not weak. It was just that the special nature of the Guanzhong torture room made it difficult for these people to stand out at such a young age. For example, the people who came today. Even Chu Xiaoda, who seemed to be the weakest, was considered decent among the younger generation of the pugilistic world. However, their only shortcoming was that they were older. It was not that they were older, just older. The average age of the people who came today was around 30. Even Zhong Ping, who was the youngest, was almost 30 years old. In the Longhu leaderboard, his age was considered quite old. And Chu Xiu was only in his early 20s. As for the others on the Longhu leaderboard, Nie Donglu and Bai Wuji were in their early 20s. There was also the sword chief Fang Qi Shao, and the previous Lin Kaiyun. They were all not even 30 years old. The reason for this was not that Yuqi and the others were lacking in cultivation. It was because the rules of the Guanzhong torture room were like this. No matter how talented you were, the Guanzhong torture room only valued your ability. At most, the torture officer would give you some preferential treatment. As for being like other sects, where the entire sect would lean towards one person, that was impossible. After confirming that Chu Xiu would be participating in the God Weapon Conference, the discussion was dismissed. After all, the torture officer still had to manage the various places in Guanzhong. It was not good for him to be away from his territory for too long. Before leaving, Wei Jiuduan was in a good mood. Seeing Yin Butong's flustered and exasperated expression, he was very pleased with himself. Patting Chu Xiu's shoulder, Wei Jiuduan said, "Kai Jingsheng's old injuries have relapsed. He will definitely have to give up his position as inspector. At that time, you were in seclusion. Situ Xing and Jiang Taoran both sent me messages, wanting to take over one of Kai Jingsheng's prefectures each. However, I did not agree. You've done a good job this time. You've ruthlessly killed the spirit of that old bastard Yin Batong. When you come back from the God Weapon Conference and win prestige and reputation for our Guanzhong Torture Hall, your contribution will be enough. I can also give you these 2 prefectures legitimately." Chu Xiu hurriedly made a grateful gesture. "Thank you, my lord." Wei Jiuduan waved his hand and said, "All right, you don't have to be so courteous. Go back and make arrangements for the Jianzhou prefecture. You can leave directly." Chu Xiu nodded. He first returned to the Jianzhou prefecture to make arrangements for the matters after he left. This time, Chu Xiu did not plan to bring anyone else to the God Weapon Conference, because it would be useless even if he did. The God Weapon Conference was a grand event held for the young talents of the pugilistic world. It was not really a competition of one's background. If Chu Xiu brought the Ghost Hand King and the others, it would be like bringing a few lackeys. They would not be of much use. Moreover, even if some disciples of the pugilistic world went down the mountain to travel the pugilistic world, most of them would not bring a lot of people. They might not even have the elders of the sect following them. The reason was very simple. Flowers in a greenhouse would not be able to cultivate true experts. If they needed the protection of the sect's elders for everything, then what was the point of them traveling the pugilistic world? The sect could only provide them with enough resources to nurture them and teach them. As for how far they could grow in the end, that would depend on themselves. Therefore, there were many young talents on the Longhu list who died halfway. Only those who were alive could be called outstanding talents. Those who were dead were just dead people. Chapter 208. The God Weapon Conference would be held in the Mo family of Mirror Lake Villa, and the Mo family was located in Changlin County of Eastern Qi. Eastern Qi was rich in natural resources and vast. Nearly half of the martial arts sects in Jianghu were located in Eastern Qi. After Chu Xiu returned to Jianzhou Prefecture and made arrangements, he directly set off for Changlin County of Eastern Qi. In the past, Chu Xiu had only stayed at the border between Eastern Qi and Guangzhong torture room. Now that he had truly entered the heart of Eastern Qi, he could feel the prosperity of Eastern Qi, which was completely different from the prosperity of Guangzhong torture room. Guangzhong torture room seemed prosperous because there were many merchants from the three countries coming and going. Eastern Qi was prosperous because of its vast land and abundant resources. The area of a big city in a prefecture was several times or even more than 10 times that of a small city in Guangzhong. There were countless merchants and martial artists coming and going. Because the God Weapon Conference would be held in 2 months, with Chu Xiu's speed, he could arrive in 1 month. Therefore, Chu Xiu was not in a hurry. Instead, he walked while eating and drinking in the various prefectures of Eastern Qi, and at the same time, he took the opportunity to see the scenery of Eastern Qi. Chu Xiu did not really care about luxurious things, but he was still very interested in eating. Usually, when it came to cultivation, he would do whatever he could to save himself. But when the conditions were right, Chu Xiu would not be stingy when it came to food. Moreover, Eastern Qi was rich in natural resources, and there were many kinds of delicacies, which could satisfy Chu Xiu's appetite. Half a month later, on the small road leading to Miramoon Villa, a pitter-patter of rain fell. Chu Xiu wore a black iron bamboo hat and a black warrior's attire from the torture hall as he walked in the rain. The black iron bamboo hat belonged to the Blue Dragon Society. Chu Xiu was used to wearing it, so he was a little reluctant to throw it away. However, he removed the dragon patterns on it. During the day, it could protect him from the sun, but it was unnecessary when it rained. That was because there was already a thin layer of gang energy surrounding Chu Xiu's body. Any raindrops that landed on the gang energy would be bounced off. A fly cannot fall, and a drop of rain cannot touch one's body. This was just a small method of using gang qi, and all experts in the oneness of heaven and man realm could do it. However, to be able to do this under the oneness of heaven and man realm, what was needed was not the accumulation of one's own inner strength, but a strong control of one's own inner strength gang qi. Chu Xiu looked up at the sky. It was just evening, but because of the cloudy clouds and rain, the sky had already darkened. He was not in a hurry to go to Mirror Lake Villa, and Chu Xiu did not plan to travel through the night. Instead, he walked forward for a while and found a small inn on the side of the road to stay. This kind of small inn on the side of the road was mostly prepared for some traveling merchants. It was relatively simple. The first floor was for eating, and the second floor was for lodging. Normally, there were not many people. However, when Chu Xiu opened the door and entered, the first floor of the small inn was already full. Almost all of them were martial artists who were traveling at night. They did not want to brave the rain, so they came here to take shelter. The inn's waiter came over and quickly said, "Sir, please come in. I will find a seat for you." However, the waiter looked around and saw that the surrounding seats were already occupied. There were 6 people beside him, taking up 2 tables for 4. The waiter went over and smiled apologetically. "Dear guests, it's not easy to go out. Would it be possible for this guest to squeeze in with you?" The 6 people were all tall, with swords and sabers on their backs. At a glance, it was obvious that they were the kind of people who traveled in Jianghu all year round. Hearing the waiter say this, one of the fierce-looking men coldly snorted and said, "What are you squeezing for? Who can you blame for not preparing so many seats for opening an inn? The waiter was so frightened by this man that he didn't dare to say anything else. However, at this moment, the expression of the older middle-aged man among the 6 suddenly changed when he saw Chu Xiu. He hurriedly pulled up the fiendish-looking man and the other person, making space for them. He smiled at Chu Xiu and said, "It's not easy to go out. We brothers all know each other, so it's fine if we squeeze together. Please, have a seat." Chu Xiu glanced at the middle-aged man and lightly said, "Thank you." The middle-aged man quickly waved his hand and said, "You are welcome. You are welcome." The fierce-looking man beside him was still somewhat dissatisfied. He said, "Big brother, why did you pull me? Why should we give up our seats to him?" In the eyes of the fierce-looking man, there was nothing special about this kid. He was dressed in ordinary clothes and was so young. He was probably a greenhorn in Jianghu. Why did his big brother seem to be so afraid of him? The middle-aged man said fiercely in a low voice, "Idiot. Look at his clothes and shoes. Is there a drop of water on them?" Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the others subconsciously looked at Chu Xiu's clothes and shoes. Their complexion immediately changed. They were not idiots. After the middle-aged man's reminder, they realized that it was raining outside. However, this young man did not have an umbrella. When he walked in from outside, there was not a drop of water on his clothes and shoes. He must be an expert who could release his gang qi. For people in Jianghu like them who had not even reached the Xiantian realm, the existence of a physical invulnerability realm expert was already an expert that they could look up to. The fierce-looking man subconsciously patted his chest. Fortunately, his big brother had reminded him. Otherwise, if he had offended such an expert, he would have ended up in a miserable state. Thinking of this, he also cupped his hands at his big brother and gave him a grateful look. At the same time, he was complaining in his heart. An expert is an expert. Why didn't he reveal his gang qi? Wasn't this purely a trap? This man did not know that unless it was a martial artist who had just stepped into the Xiantian realm and could not control his gang qi, most martial artists would not reveal their strong gang qi when they had nothing to do. Were they afraid that others would not know what their realm was? Were they afraid that they would not be conspicuous? Generally, there were only 2 kinds of people who would do this. The truly confident experts and the stupid ones. At this time, the others also looked at Chu Xiu, but they did not say anything. Eastern Qi was a vast place with abundant resources. There were already many experts in Jianghu coming and going. Especially recently, the whole Jianghu was in an uproar because of the God Weapon Conference at Mirror Lake Villa. Not to mention Eastern Qi, there were also many young experts coming and going from West Chu and Northern Yan. It was normal for Chu Xiu to appear here. This path was one of the roads leading to Mirror Lake Villa. The waiter breathed a sigh of relief and asked Chu Xiu, "Sir, what would you like to eat?" Chu Xiu asked, "What do you have here?" The waiter hurriedly said, "Our restaurant has secret donkey meat that has been cooked for 6 hours. It is very famous around here. We also have all kinds of home-cooked dishes." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "Give me 3 caddies of donkey meat. Pick some other specialties and a pot of yellow wine." The waiter quickly went to prepare the wine. After a while, the wine and dishes were served. Chu Xiu tasted them. Other than the donkey meat, the others were relatively ordinary. However, this was only a small inn, so Chu Xiu was not too picky. Just when he was halfway through his meal, the door was suddenly pushed open with great force. A few people walked in from outside, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Among these people, the leader was a man and a woman. The man was wearing a luxurious brocade robe, and he could be considered handsome. The woman was wearing a white palace dress. She was beautiful, which was very incompatible with this small inn in the wilderness. There were 4 people behind them. 2 of them were innate and the other 2 were inner invulnerability. They were not young anymore. Obviously, they were guards or guests. However, at this time, these people seemed to be very tired, as if they had been on the road for many days. Seeing that there were no seats in the inn, the young man frowned. He happened to see Chu Xiu occupying a table. He was about to say something, but he was pulled by an old man in the inner invulnerability realm behind him. The old man whispered something in his ear, and the young man immediately looked away. The young master took out an ingot of silver and placed it at the table where Chu Xiu and the others had given up their seats. He said indifferently, "Everyone, it's not easy for me to take care of the women here. Please give up your seats. This meal will be on me." Although this young master said that it was troublesome, his tone was still condescending. The fierce-looking man's face suddenly became a little ugly. Giving up their seats just for a meal? How could they bully others like this? However, before he could say anything, he was pulled up by his elder brother. The elder brother cupped his hands and said to the young man, "You're too polite. Please sit down." After that, he whispered to the fierce-looking man, "Third brother, don't cause trouble when you're outside. This person looks like a young man from an aristocratic family. He even has women and guards with him. It's not easy to mess with them. Don't offend them." At this time, those who still had 1 or 2 empty seats at other tables also invited the 6 of them to go over. 1 or 2 people squeezed into a table and sat down. They were all outside. Sometimes, these individual cultivators were still very united, especially in the face of those from aristocratic families and sections. It was easy for them to have a common enemy. Just now, when Chu Xiu entered the door, he did not have such an arrogant attitude. It was the waiter who suggested giving up his seat. In the end, this young man was not strong, but he was very arrogant. After the young man sat down, he directly said to the waiter, "Take out all the good things in your shop. Be quick. After eating, we still have to hurry." After the waiter left, the young man took out a handkerchief, wiped the chopsticks, and handed it to the woman. He said, "Cousin, this is a small village shop. You just have to put up with it. When we reach the Mirror Lake Villa, everything will be fine." The cousin showed a reluctant smile and said, "Cousin, you don't have to say that. This is an urgent matter. How can I be the kind of woman who doesn't know what's good for me?" Chu Xiu, who was not far from them, raised his eyebrows. These people are also going to the Mirror Lake Villa to participate in the God Weapon Convention? The strength of this young man was only at the early stage of the inborn realm. He would only be there to watch the fun. However, at this time, a sneer came from outside the inn. "You still have the mood to eat? Zhang Chuhan, I'm afraid you won't be able to reach the Mirror Lake Villa. Hand over the things. My leader will help you to send them to the Mirror Lake Villa." Chapter 209. The door of the inn was directly smashed to smithereens, and more than 10 warriors wearing cyan warrior uniforms and holding sawtooth wolf blades walked into the inn. They looked at the man and woman and sneered. "Zhang Chuhan, Zhang Baining, you two are really good at running away. How dare you deceive our leader? You're courting death. However, the 2 of you are truly heartless. You actually disregarded your own clans and ran away with the things just like that." Zhang Chuhan's expression suddenly changed. "What did you do to my Zhang family?" The leading martial artist sneered and said, "What's wrong? Can't you guess what will happen to those who dare to deceive our Heavenly Wolf Gang?" Hearing that the leading martial artist claimed to be from the Heavenly Wolf Gang, everyone's expression changed slightly. The Heavenly Wolf Gang was a big gang in Linqing County in eastern Qi. They were very strong in terms of strength, but they were more famous for their way of doing things. They were like a pack of wolves, acting crazily. Any sect that had a grudge with them, once bitten by them, would not rest until one of them was dead. Therefore, even sects that were stronger than the Heavenly Wolf Gang were not willing to provoke this mad dog. This led to the Heavenly Wolf Gang becoming more and more famous. Even their reputation had spread to the outside world. At this time, everyone looked at Zhang Chuhan and Zhang Baining with a little sympathy on their faces. Being targeted by such a mad dog like the Heavenly Wolf Gang, the ending could be imagined. Although Zhang Chuhan's attitude was a little arrogant just now, why would they care about a dead man? The leading martial artist of the Heavenly Wolf Gang had the strength of a physical invulnerability expert. The other 10 or so people of the Heavenly Wolf Gang had the strength of both innate and internal invulnerability experts. Whether it was strength or numbers, they crushed the people of the Zhang family in all aspects. Zhang Chuhan's expression suddenly changed. He suddenly lowered his head and looked at Zhang Baining. He actually pushed Zhang Baining to Chu Xiu, who was sitting next to them, and he turned around and ran toward the small door at the back of the inn. Seeing this scene, everyone present was stunned. To be honest, they had been in the Jianghu for so many years, but they had never seen such a shameless person. He actually left a woman here as a shield and ran away by himself. Although these people were born in the Jianghu and were at the bottom of the Jianghu, they could not bear to see this scene. At this time, Zhang Baining was leaning on Chu Xiu's side, as if she couldn't bear this kind of blow. Her eyes were red and big drops of tears fell. Looking at Chu Xiu's pitiful expression, she sobbed silently. Although she didn't ask for help, her appearance had already explained everything. Zhang Baining's appearance was definitely top-notch. Seeing such an enchanting beauty showing such an expression in front of them, even the others present were a little moved. They couldn't help but have a desire to protect her. However, Chu Xiu still continued to eat and drink as if the beauty beside him was air. The leader of the Heavenly Wolf Gang was stunned for a moment, then he laughed disdainfully and said, "Coward! How dare you try to play tricks with my Heavenly Wolf Gang with this kind of conduct? You really don't know your place." The people of the Heavenly Wolf Gang were not worried that Zhang Chuhan would run away. With Zhang Chuhan's speed, where could he run to? Looking at the people in the inn, the leader of the Heavenly Wolf Gang said coldly, "If you want to meddle in other people's business, you should first weigh your own weight. All of you, get out." The warriors in the inn suddenly shrank their necks when they heard this. Just now, when they saw Zhang Baining's pitiful appearance, they were really a little moved. Their hearts were full of heroic spirit, and they wanted to play a hero to save the beauty. However, after hearing the leader of the Heavenly Wolf Gang scolding, all the people present calmed down. They were just a group of people at the bottom of the Jianghu who struggled to make a living. They didn't even have the existence of the Xiantian realm. How could they fight with the notorious Heavenly Wolf Gang? The price to pay for meddling in other people's business was their life. There might be things that would suddenly become hot-blooded, but not in this kind of situation. Therefore, under the scolding of the Heavenly Wolf Gang's warriors, even if they were angry in their hearts, they had no choice but to retreat to the side and leave. Seeing this scene, the innkeeper who was hiding under the counter wanted to cry, but had no tears. There was such a big room of people, but not a single one paid money. Everyone had left, and only Chu Xiu, who was still sitting in the same place, eating and drinking, was the most conspicuous. The leader of the Heavenly Wolf Gang looked at Chu Xiu and said with a grim smile, "Boy, do you want to meddle in other people's business?" The other warriors couldn't see through Chu Xiu's strength when he didn't release his aura, because his cultivation was very weak. However, this warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang was also in the physical invulnerability realm. He could also faintly feel the aura of the physical invulnerability realm from Chu Xiu, but he didn't care. They had more than 10 people on their side. If they swarmed him, why would they be afraid of Chu Xiu? Moreover, the warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang were famous for being crazy, and they would easily fight to the death with others. Not to mention that Chu Xiu was a physical invulnerability expert. Even if Chu Xiu was an expert in the three-flower realm, he would still dare to fight him. It was precisely because of this kind of crazy behavior that the Heavenly Wolf Gang was able to develop to its current level in a very short period of time. Chu Xiu drank the yellow wine in his cup and said calmly, "I actually hate meddling in other people's business the most." The warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang sneered and said, "It's good that you're not used to meddling in other people's business. The Heavenly Wolf Gang's business is not so easy to meddle in." However, at this time, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Although I don't like meddling in other people's business, I hate it when people disturb me when I eat and drink. Obviously, you have already disturbed me, so I'm very unhappy." When the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang heard this, he immediately sneered and spat, "After talking for so long, you still want to stand up for this woman from the Zhang family. Her good-for-nothing cousin doesn't want her anymore, and you want to go against the Heavenly Wolf Gang? You're courting death." As he said this, the physical invulnerability realm warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang directly slashed at Chu Xiu without saying a word. The ferocious sawtooth wolf fang blade bloomed with a crimson light, and its power was actually extraordinary. The reason the Heavenly Wolf Gang was able to dominate a county was of course not because they were crazy and unafraid of death, but also because of their leader's magnanimous way of doing things. Ordinary gangs would definitely be much more treasured than sects, and the powerful skills would be in the hands of a small number of people. However, the Heavenly Wolf Gang was different. The leader of the Heavenly Wolf Gang actually passed down his core skills, which also led to the entire Heavenly Wolf Gang being very cohesive. That was why the warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang all held the same weapons. When she saw the might of the Heavenly Wolf Gang's warriors attack, Zhang Baining immediately shrieked in fright. She quietly hid behind Chu Xiu. The powerful blade approached, but Chu Xiu didn't even stand up. He directly stretched out a hand, and an extremely powerful Gang Qi instantly burst out. The primordial origin was the ultimate evolution of power. With Chu Xiu's current cultivation, there were only two types of people who could really be his opponent. One was an expert in the three-flower realm, and the other was a young genius on the Longhu list. Although the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang was also in the physical invulnerability realm, he obviously didn't belong to these two types of people, so he was directly crushed by Chu Xiu's strength. After cultivating the great primordial origin technique of heaven and earth chaos, in terms of pure true qi, few people in the same realm could match him. A burst of Gang Qi exploded, and Chu Xiu's hand that was holding the blade suddenly exerted force. The sawtooth wolf fang blade, which was 3 revolutions, was directly crushed by Chu Xiu. The moment the weapon made contact, the body of the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang was involuntarily pulled toward Chu Xiu. The great sacrificial grappling hand. For warriors who were not as strong as Chu Xiu, especially those whose physical strength was not as strong as Chu Xiu, this technique was simply an instant kill. Everyone could only see the figure of the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang being pulled toward Chu Xiu, but in the blink of an eye, he was thrown out by Chu Xiu. No one could see the entire process clearly. However, in mid-air, the body of the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang was directly separated from his body. A large amount of blood gushed out like a fountain. It was only at this moment that everyone saw that in that instant, the warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang had his head forcibly twisted off by Chu Xiu. It was an instant kill. It was a simple instant kill. The warrior of the Heavenly Wolf Gang died like a chicken that had its head twisted off. He was extremely fragile. Hearing the sound of the corpse and the head falling to the ground, the members of the Heavenly Wolf Gang felt as if they had been hit in the chest by a heavy hammer. Their faces were filled with incomparable horror. The Heavenly Wolf Gang dominated Lincheng County to the point that no one dared to provoke them. Even some of the bigger sects that were stronger than them would not want to provoke this group of mad dogs if there was no conflict of interest. Therefore, most of the warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang had cultivated an arrogant and overbearing character. However, it was only at this moment that they felt true terror. The terror of being on the brink of death. Although they had always acted like they were not afraid of death and were extremely crazy, it was precisely because of this that it proved that they were actually very afraid of death in their hearts. They were also human. Those who were truly unafraid of death would not say it out loud. Those who barked all day long were mad dogs. Those who truly dared to bite people to death would never bark. Run. At this moment, the frightened warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang only had this one word in their minds. In the face of a terrifying existence that had twisted off their leader's head with one move, they did not even have the courage to fight back. I've already said that I'll be very unhappy if someone disturbs me while I'm eating and drinking. Chu Xiu gently raised his hand. In an instant, more than 10 rays of blood and chi light erupted with a bloody aura and flew towards the 10 warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang. A series of soft, puff sounds were heard and more than 10 warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang fell to the ground one after another. They did not even have the chance to let out a cry. When the crowd looked closely, they realized that all the warriors of the Heavenly Wolf Gang had an ordinary bamboo chopstick stuck in their foreheads. Red-white fluid was flowing out of the wounds. The scene was completely silent. Chapter 210. In Jianghu, killing was a very common thing, and so was death. However, Chu Xiu's terrifying killing method was very rare. Ordinary bamboo chopsticks could explode with such power under the cover of gang qi. How strong was this person's gang qi? It was especially so for the fierce-looking man who wanted to challenge Chu Xiu because of his position. After seeing this scene, he suddenly shivered, and his heart was filled with joy. If he really challenged this person just now, then the fate of these corpses in front of him would be his fate. At this time, Zhang Bing, who was behind Chu Xiu, also saw this scene and opened her mouth in surprise. Obviously, she did not expect Chu Xiu's strength to be so strong that killing warriors of the same level was as easy as killing chickens. These people from the serious gang were extremely arrogant before, but in the end, they could not even withstand one move from Chu Xiu. Zhang Baining bowed to Chu Xiu and said with a pitiful expression, "Thank you, young master, for saving me. I can't thank you enough. If there is a chance in the future, I will definitely repay young master's great kindness." With that, Zhang Bing bowed to Chu Xiu again and was about to leave with the Zhang family's servants. But at this moment, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Wait." Zhang Bing stopped in her tracks and was stunned. "Young master, do you have any other orders?" Chu Xiu said lightly, "No need. If there is a chance in the future, if you want to repay the kindness, you can do it now." Zhang Bing was stunned, and a trace of red suddenly appeared on her face. "Young master, how do you want me to repay you?" The conversation between these two people was a little misleading. When the people watching the show outside the inn saw this scene, they immediately cursed in their hearts, "Beast." It turned out that this kid wasn't a good person either. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and said, "There seems to be something in your hands that has attracted the attention of the serious gang, so you are being chased. It happens that I am also interested in this thing. You may be chased after with that thing. Why don't you give it to me? I will take care of it for you." Zhang Baining was stunned for a moment, then a bitter smile appeared on her face. "That thing is the root of the trouble, because it even implicated my Zhang family. If I had that thing on me, I would definitely give it to you, but it has already been taken away by my cousin." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "There was once a very beautiful woman who said that the more beautiful a woman is, the more liar she is. It seems that she was right. You are so beautiful, but you don't even blink when lying." Chu Xiu slowly stood up and walked in front of Zhang Baining. He placed his hand on Zhang Baining's smooth and tender face, causing Zhang Baining's body to stiffen. The guards of the Zhang family also tensed up, but under the pressure of Chu Xiu's powerful aura, they didn't even move. Chu Xiu's hand slid down Zhang Bing's face and landed on her snow-white neck. Just when everyone thought that Chu Xiu's hand would continue to move down and do something beastly, Chu Xiu suddenly clenched his hand and strangled Zhang Bing's neck. Zhang Bing's face immediately turned red, and her eyes revealed a frightened expression. Still not coming out? Aren't you very infatuated with your cousin? If you don't come out, I will strangle her now. Let go of my cousin. An angry shout came. Zhang Chuhan, who had just escaped, unexpectedly appeared from the small door again. Her eyes were red as she glared at Chu Xiu. This scene caused everyone present to be unable to react. Didn't this brat just shamelessly abandon his cousin and run away? Why is he back now? Chu Xiu's lips curled into a mocking smile as he said, "Young Master Zhang is truly an infatuated person. Others might think that you're shamelessly abandoning your cousin and running away, but you're actually planning to use yourself as bait to lure the people from the Heavenly Wolf Gang away, or at least a portion of them, right? That's why you left your guards to your cousin. Your courage is commendable, and your spirit is also worthy of praise. But why did you use me? I hate being used by others the most." As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Xiu's hand tightened, which immediately made Zhang Chuhan nervous. He quickly said, "Stop. Don't move. What do you want? I will give it to you." Chu Xiu let go of Zhang binding in his hand and said indifferently, "Give me the item and tell me the ins and outs of the matter." When Zhang Chuhan heard this, he quickly nodded and said, "I promise you, don't touch my cousin." Chu Xiu said that he was infatuated with love. For his cousin, he would really agree to anything. At this time, Chu Xiu suddenly glanced at the martial artists outside the door who were watching the show. He said lightly, "Watching the show isn't a good habit. If you hear something you shouldn't hear, the consequences will be very miserable." Hearing this, the warriors immediately shivered in fright and ran to the side in fright. However, some people were still curious and did not leave. They looked from afar, although they could not hear anything at this distance and could not see anything. Chu Xiu did not care about them. He just said to Zhang Chuhan, "Take out the thing and tell me what is going on. Why is it related to the hidden sword villa?" Zhang Chuhan looked at Zhang Bing. Zhang Bing's face showed a hint of unwillingness, but she still took out a secret box from her bosom. After opening it, it turned out to be a token fragment that exuded a shocking demonic aura. Seeing the token fragment, Chu Xiu's eyes suddenly showed a touch of surprise. This token fragment was exactly the same as the one he had obtained from the Ghost King sect. From the material and the rune patterns on it, it could be seen that these two token fragments should be from the same type of token, but it was not certain that they were the same one. However, the token fragment in Chu Xiu's hand did not have the slightest demonic aura, but the demonic aura on this token fragment made Chu Xiu shocked. It was an extremely pure demonic aura. It was just pure demonic, without any impurities. Zhang Chuhan's face revealed a trace of bitterness as he said, "It is because of this unknown item that my Zhang family suffered a calamity. I opened this item from an unremarkable and cheap secret box. There were originally 2 of them, but because of the monstrous demonic aura, it did not seem like a good item. However, it also did not seem like an ordinary item, so I took one out and wanted to ask a knowledgeable formation master to take a look." In the end, the formation master studied it for a period of time but was unable to figure it out. He even leaked the news of this item, causing a hall master of the White Tiger Hall to come to ask for it. Although my Zhang family is not weak in Lincheng County, it is not comparable to the White Tiger Hall, one of the 4 spirits. Therefore, my Zhang family is willing to hand it over. However, it was later heard that the hall master of the White Tiger Hall died in a battle with the Blue Dragon Society, so the matter was left unsettled. However, this matter was spread by the formation master, and the Heavenly Wolf Gang found out. The Heavenly Wolf Gang is overbearing. Although they do not know what this item is, since they know that it is something that the people of the White Tiger Hall want, it must be something good. Therefore, the Heavenly Wolf Gang also came to ask for it. When I handed this item over, I kept an eye on it. The outside world only knows that there is one, so I gave one to the Heavenly Wolf Gang. In the end, the Heavenly Wolf Gang somehow connected with the Hidden Sword Villa and gave this item to the Hidden Sword Villa, exchanging it for many good things. Currently, the God Weapon Convention that is being widely publicized in the outside world is one of the main materials used to forge this God Weapon, which is in the hands of our Zhang clan. After hearing this, Chu Xiu finally understood what was going on. He had always been very curious about how the God Armament Convention happened, and now he finally understood. It turned out that all of this was related to him. If Chu Xiu guessed correctly, then the Hall Master of the White Tiger Hall should be the one he lured to deal with the Heavenly Sin Branch leader. In the original plot, the person definitely did not die, so he successfully obtained the fragment of the token from the Zhang family. Naturally, the matter of the Heavenly Wolf Gang and the Hidden Sword Villa did not happen. Without the main material, the God Armament Convention could not be held. However, now that Chu Xiu appeared and caused the Hall Master of the White Tiger Hall to be killed by the Heavenly Sin Branch leader, everything began to change, leading to this series of events. Chu Xiu couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He really didn't have much of an advantage left in this world. As he grew stronger and stronger, he came into contact with more and more people, and he changed more and more things. Suppressing these feelings, Chu Xiu looked at Zhang Chuhan with a smile that did not seem like a smile and said, "If I'm not wrong, you should have heard about the Hidden Sword Villa and realized that the thing in your hands is a treasure, so you wanted to take it to the Hidden Sword Villa to exchange for some benefits. In the end, the news was leaked, and the Heavenly Wolf Gang found out that you tricked them?" Zhang Chuhan lowered his head in silence. The truth was similar to what Chu Xiu had guessed. The things that the Hidden Sword Villa had given to the Heavenly Wolf Gang made the Zhang family very envious. To the Hidden Sword Villa, one of the 5 major sword sects, the things that they had revealed through their fingers were more than the Zhang family had accumulated for hundreds of years. Of course, they also wanted these things. Chu Xiu's action of taking away the fragment of the token immediately caused Zhang Chuhan's heart to ache. For the sake of this item, the Zhang family had suffered at the hands of the Heavenly Wolf Gang, but in the end, they still could not keep it. They had used Chu Xiu to kill the members of the Heavenly Wolf Gang, but in the end, they had led a wolf into the house. No, they had lured a ferocious tiger into the house. Zhang Chuhan wanted to say something, but his hand was pressed down by Zhang Baining. Zhang Baining's gaze paused on Chu Xiu for a moment, and a strange look appeared in her eyes. She pulled Zhang Chuhan up and said to Chu Xiu with a pitiful expression, "Sir, we've handed over the item. Can we leave now?" Chu Xiu suddenly raised his head and said to Zhang Baining with a smile that did not seem like a smile, "I've said it before, the more beautiful a woman is, the more deceptive she is. Unfortunately, Miss Zhang, your acting skills are not up to standard. You saw everything just now, right? You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.